here now. Yep, so far, and everything is a picture. Everything is a picture. He turns and like, slow down, I need to take a picture. It's like, can't slow down in the middle of traffic. Yeah. So, pardon? 7. So then he's fiddling with his camera. He doesn't know, like, I'm trying to find the camera function. So it's just a comedy of, it would probably be a really great reality show, so I'm having a meltdown. You just ran before, now it stopped? Yes. That's going to be very interesting. Yes. How was your vacation? Good. It's the whole reason of going. Hello. Why else would you go to Cambridge? Right. Send your kids there.
And with that, I'll call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, July the 16th. Look into the agenda. Are there any additions, changes? Seeing none, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We have one delegation, the Canmore Public Library Board. Ms. Preston.
Mr. Mayor and members of Council, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon and briefly discuss some of our library's accomplishments and highlights from the past year. Joining me today, Beth Millard, Chair of the Library Board, and Ann Baker and Ann Medikosh are board members as well. Our library is a vibrant municipal service, well used by the community and sought out as a valuable partner by other community organizations. Thanks to the ongoing support of Council and Administration, the Friends of the Library, and the Marigold Library System, our library's 24 dedicated staff have been able to provide and maintain a high level of library service to the community. After 6 years in Elevation Place, we are busier than ever. We currently offer more than 20 regular in-house programs such as movie night, preschool story time, and author talks, in addition to special and seasonal events like our summer reading program, Science Literacy Week, Family Fortnight, and gingerbread house making workshops. We also have over 20 outreach initiatives and partnerships, such as our Homebound Readers Service, Step Up to Reading program, and Books on the Bus. Last year, we had over 20,000 program participants and over 189,000 visitors through our doors, so we're certainly a well-used facility. Guiding many of our initiatives are 2 specific documents, our plan of service and our strategic plan. A copy of our new strategic plan was included in your package. It is new for 2019 through 24 and includes 5 goals with associated initiatives and strategies for success. This document, in conjunction with our plan of service, gives the library clear operational and service targets for the next several years. The items I'll touch on for the rest of the presentation will illustrate some of the specific ways that we are working to implement these goals. In previous years, we've offered month-long free membership drives, and removing the library fee has always proved very popular. We'd always see jumps in membership rates for both new cards and renewals. As expected, after we implemented free memberships on May 1st of this year, we saw a jump in the number of new and renewed memberships. In May, we saw an increase of 132% from May over last year in new memberships. In June, we saw 86% increase in new memberships. For renewals in May, we saw 88% increase. And in June, we saw 30%. We recognize the operational impacts of this change, and we're actively working to offset the loss in membership revenue. We've revised our room rental rates, aligning them with the rest of Elevation Place. We've increased our exam invigilation fees, and we're exploring various grant opportunities, both operational and project-based, that will supplement our regular budget. The response from library users has been overwhelmingly positive, and we'll certainly keep working hard to maintain that free membership aspect. In January this year, the Library Board formalized an agreement with the Banff Canmore Community Foundation to establish an endowment fund for the library. We were very fortunate to have two generous founding donors, Margie and Elliot Bingham, and the Friends of the Canmore Library. We announced the endowment fund to the community in February of this year and held a small launch celebration that was attended by members from the foundation, the library board, the Friends of the Library, town administration, and council. Since the launch, we've had some additional community donations, and the library board is currently seeking community members for the endowment fund committee. This is a long-term financial strategy for the library, and in time, we'll provide ways to enhance our program services and the facility. Another way we're enhancing library service and accessibility is online, and on June 1st, we launched a brand new website. The template and software platform was provided by the Marigold Library System, and within the framework, we maintain the content, and we built the majority of what you see there. Along with a fresh, modern look, it gives quick access to the library's social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It provides a more streamlined portal to our online services such as ebooks, e-audiobooks, streaming video, and downloading full-text magazines and newspapers. And for the first time, and we're really excited about this, we're able to provide online registration for library programs. As noted earlier, the library does a lot of programming and outreach. Library service to the Indigenous community continues to be an important focus for us. The Canmore Library has been steadily increasing our program offerings to the people of the Stoney Nakoda Nation, both on and off reserve. 3 years ago, we assisted with the formation of a summer reading game at the Morley Community Center. And since then, we've progressed to monthly storytime visits at the Stoney Elementary School for kindergarten and grade 1s. We've held storytimes and tours at our library. And we've continued our summer reading game and visits to community events on the reserve. So far this year, we've done 9 on-reserve visits to 565 participants. Further building on our Indigenous programming was the iWrite program. Writing with Indigenous Youth was an 8-week writing course designed for grade 9 Indigenous students at Canmore Collegiate High School. This was a new initiative between the library and the Canmore Collegiate that successfully provided library programming and memberships to an underserved part of the community. Taught by library clerk and professional writer and editor Helen Rolfe, the course ran in fall of 2018 on Wednesday mornings from October through December. Students were fully engaged with weekly writing exercises and challenges and produced thoughtful written pieces each time. The final session included a trip to the library where the students received a tour, refreshments, and for many of them, their very first library card. This entire program was funded by an Indigenous funding grant received from Marigold, and we also received recognition at a library system level for this program. We received an honorable mention for the Marigold Making a Difference Award, showcasing excellence in service at this year's library workshop. These are just 2 quotes, some feedback we received from the program. One of the iWrite students after class approached Helen and showed her on her iPhone. She'd scrolled through and wrote page after page after page of writing one weekend, and was very, very proud of her accomplishment and told Helen that she had been inspired to write because of the program. And one of the teachers said that each class found students actually putting pens or pencils to paper, expressing themselves in different ways. They were given concrete tools to express their thoughts and opinions in a non-judgmental venue, and she felt it was a valuable, validating experience for all of her students. Some of our other outreach programs of note were the Folk Festival. We had a booth at last year's festival, and it proved very successful during the August long weekend. Staff estimated we had over 1,100 people stop by over the course of the weekend. Just a browser chat, and it proved an excellent opportunity to build library visibility. Our free book giveaway also proved very popular with festival goers, and we're going to be at the festival again this year, so if you're going to be there, please stop by and be sure to pick up your free book. In October, we also partnered with FCSS to host our first Seniors Information and Active Living Fair at Elevation Place. This was a free afternoon of information for seniors and family members, highlighting local resources that are available in the community. The library provided free books, memberships, and information about our services, and there were an additional 29 vendor tables comprised of community agencies and services. So many that the building's atrium, in addition to our programming room, was needed to accommodate everybody. When the word got out about the event, other tenants in the building also got involved, and they provided climbing and fitness demonstrations through the afternoon. It was busy, and the hope of empowering members of the community with valuable information regarding services for seniors was achieved. With great feedback, we've been asked to consider making this an annual event, and we're in the works of planning this year's event in October again. And these are just a few other examples of some of the outreach and programs that we're currently offering. Our Knit in Public Day, a brand new French book club, Food and Friends Night, Loosey Goosey, which is a free drop-in for families. They can use their imagination just to have fun in our program room. And our Strong Women event. This year was our 4th annual, and one participant explained that she attended her first Strong Women event 2 years ago, 2 weeks after she had just moved to Canmore. And the event made her feel at home and part of the community and the library. She's been an avid library user ever since, and she feels that this place is a true center of town. In our mind, that's the kind of feedback that truly measures our library success. In conclusion, I would just like to ask Library Board Chair Beth Millard up to the podium to say a quick word, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you.
Mayor Borelman and members of council, I just want to thank you for this opportunity to come and share with you some of the accomplishments of the library, and I want to thank Michelle for doing a good job of doing that. We often come to your space and share information about the library, but as the board we were talking and feel maybe we've been remiss in not inviting you to our space. And I would like to offer, and it's a very early invitation and it has no details at this time, but in April, we'll be celebrating our 7th anniversary in Elevation Place. And we hope to have an event, and we hope to invite all of you to come to that event to celebrate our anniversary with us and see the library in action. Thank you very much.
That's great. It's a ways away, but be sure to, when we get the invite, that'd be great.
Okay,
Thank you.
Questions?
And thanks very much for the presentation. It was really interesting and always good for council to just have an overview of what's happening there for those of us that don't make it there too often. I had one or two very brief questions. One falls out from a conversation council was having yesterday in a workshop session around community space available for cultural activities, but other community needs. And I'm just curious, the space that you have at the library that's available for community groups, how's that utilized? Is it heavily utilized? Is there availability, or how do you?
That's a great question. It is very heavily used. We obviously need to give priority to our library programs, but beyond that, it is available for any member of the public, community groups, and we also get a lot of inquiries from groups outside of the Bow Valley, from Calgary, et cetera, coming in. Because there's limited other spaces like that in Elevation Place, we tend to be the ones that people come to, but we try to, as many opportunities as possible, provide that space and our meeting room as well for smaller groups.
Great, good to know. Thank you. And I'm also curious about the endowment fund and the relationship that you described with the board. So I've certainly heard about the fund that was created through the generous contribution of some people in the community. Did I understand then that the library board will be actively recruiting future donors? Is that the plan?
That's correct. They're in the process of forming the endowment fund committee, which will be a combination of community members as well as library board members, so that we can get a cross-section and have as much opportunity as possible.
Excellent. That's great. Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. You mentioned online bookings for library programs. I'm pretty excited by that technology too. How's it going so far? Is it too soon to tell? I imagine easier bookings, more bookings, and better use of staff time?
That's correct. We actually are testing it this year with our summer reading program, and so far it's been quite successful, and it is actually saving staff time, and it also generates notices to the people that they've successfully registered, and it keeps waiting lists and lets people know if someone drops out and registers them, so that has been a big help.
Likely reminders as well, hey? That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Councillor Comfort?
Yes, thanks for your presentation. I was just curious. I think I heard you say you invigilate for exams. So I'm just curious about that. Which exams and what is the fee for invigilation?
We invigilate for a lot of distance learning students. The number of universities and colleges, it varies. Some from out of, like Quebec, we have some Athabasca courses, and we charge $30 per exam. We do online as well as in-house, and we get actually a lot of people coming in. It's still a quite reasonable fee compared to other organizations around, but we used to charge $20, and we did bump it up.
Thank you.
Councillor Mara?
Thank you for your presentation. It was great information. It's nice to have that out in the public. I'd like to thank you and your team for all your hard work. And it's good to have out in the community to know that what a value what you are to us and what services you provide. So thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, comments from members of council? Seeing none, thanks very much for being here today and sharing all that great information. Looking now to the minutes of the Tuesday, June 18th Committee of the Whole, are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move the minutes be adopted as presented. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. We'll move on now to item D1, the draft area structure plan and conceptual schematic policy development update. And coming to the council for the first time, we welcome Mr. Welsh, the development planner. And since it's your first time in front of council, we'll be particularly grueling on you.
Thanks. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Thanks also for the introduction. I am latest full-time addition to the Planning Department. I'm a development planner, been here since November, but this is my first time addressing you all. I will try my hardest to not get into the weeds with this. We do intend to have a workshop with you all in August, so let's anticipate that being the time to do that. But what I'd like to do today is to introduce to you all where we are at with our development for policies, various policies for some gaps we have in planning. And so my simple ask to you is, if you have any comments or questions, please ask, and we'll do our best to address them or take them into consideration as we move forward. So let me get this up here. So the agenda today looks pretty straightforward. I'm going to go through a few definitions, talk a bit about the background with ASPs, conceptual schemes, area structure plans, what needs we have here in planning, have a bit of discussion or topics for discussion, and then speak to next steps. And so what I'm here to talk to you about today essentially are the first two columns here, but I want to go through this. This essentially is a sequence for planning and development throughout Alberta. And following any municipal development plan, traditionally there are area structure plans or area redevelopment plans. Those are statutory planning documents that provide high-level policy direction. And they're consistent with the MDP. Following that phase, traditionally are conceptual schemes. Conceptual schemes are known in other municipalities as different things, concept plans, neighborhood structure plans. In our MDP, we call them conceptual schemes, and that comes from the MGA. They essentially are planning documents adopted as a bylaw resolution that address smaller areas of development. And they are tied to a standing ASP or ARP. And so they help then to set up subdivision and future development. And so subdivision, pretty straightforward, subdividing land. But that subdivision has to respect the ASP's conceptual schemes, engineering standards that are in place. And then they help set up essentially size, location, shape of development as you move forward. And then you have development building permits, which is pretty self-explanatory. We feel that filling these gaps in policy with area structure plans, area redevelopment plans, and conceptual schemes will help establish clear processes and goals for content. And so, essentially, ARPs and ASPs, I'll refer to them as that moving forward, they establish the principles. CSs outline the details for how to develop. Zoning and subdivision solidify the development footprint, and then development building permits essentially are development and building. And so I'm going to highlight a bit of what the MGA and our MDP says regarding these three types of plans. Section 633 of the MGA speaks to the musts, what must happen with ASPs. They must outline a sequence of development. They must set up land uses for proposed areas, or the proposed area. They must determine density. They must also determine general location of such things as major transportation routes and utility corridors. Per the MDP, we stipulate a few more things that what ASPs may do. And this could range anything from speaking to affordable housing to speaking to the visual impacts of the development. And so we have a series of things that we have at our disposal within planning to embellish upon what ASPs should address. And so ARPs, outlined by the MGA, the MGA doesn't necessarily state must, they say may. Because ARPs traditionally can be rather diverse, and traditionally they are looking at an area that is going to be redeveloped, and so it traditionally is triggered by significant land use change or significant increase in density, and it helps to set up what infrastructure changes are needed moving forward. And so it may address rehabilitation of buildings, removing buildings, replacing buildings, et cetera, et cetera. Traditionally, buildings, roads, infrastructure is what we deal with at the ARP planning phase. So conceptual schemes aren't spoken to much in the MGA, but more so in our MDP. And they are intended to further outline proposed land uses. Again, speak to density, sequence of phasing and development, what the physical environmental features are. And so this slide looks pretty similar to what I showed you for ASPs. And so if we go back to essentially that area structure plans and area redevelopment plans are to set up the principles, conceptual schemes are there to outline the details for how you develop. And so they're very interconnected. One sets up the other. Moving forward, one of the questions that we'll have to address is how conceptual schemes are approved, either through bylaw or through resolution. Obviously, bylaw has 3 readings: public hearing, bylaw amendment application. Resolution could just involve lower level engagement, a single hearing. But with a resolution, the onus is more on planning staff to ensure that this conceptual scheme is respecting the ASP or ARP that it's associated with. So a bit of background.
Do you mind if we interrupt with questions, or
sure, that's
would
fine.
you rather we wait till you finish your presentation? Either way.
I'm okay with interruptions. If I need to, or if we'll get to it later, I'll mention that. Or if I want to keep moving, I'll ask that we do that.
Okay.
Do you have a particular question at this point?
Just on that last note, you noted there'll be a question as to how conceptual plans will be approved. I'm just curious, what's the normal approach in other municipalities, if you know?
It depends on where you go, right? So in Edmonton, they call them neighborhood structure plans. They are bylaw. They become an amendment to the ASP, so they're tacked onto the ASP. In other municipalities, they're just reviewed and approved as a resolution. we have the ability to figure out which is best for Canmore, and that's the process we're entering
So
into.
there's no one size fits all with that?
No.
Great, thank you.
So we're doing our best to scour all of Alberta to see how other municipalities do this, keeping in mind that Canmore is extremely unique in its context and its location, all of that. So to get back to a bit of what we have in place, we have 4 ASPs and 4 ARPs currently approved by council. The last ASP was approved in 2007. The last ARP was 2012. If you look through these, you'll notice that each is unique and oftentimes with dissimilar content and approaches to how they were developed. And that's something we would like to address with this policy, or these policies, I should say. And so historically, ASPs and ARPs in Canmore have been developed on a case-by-case basis without a real consistent approach from one to the next. And traditionally, we use terms of references to set up what's expected of an ASP or an ARP. However, because of not having policy in place, there's been a bit of a lack of clarity around expectations for content and process, and we'd like to address that by developing policy. And so I'm going to address what we feel our needs are, our immediate needs are. We'd like to develop an ASP, ARP policy that expands upon the MGA's guidance with essentially more general guidance to direct the land use concept, development policy, servicing plan, implementation plan, things as such. And so basically establish the principles that we're looking for ASPs and ARPs. With regard to conceptual schemes, we'd like to do a bit more work. We'd like to expand upon what the MDP says to provide guidelines associated with appropriate neighborhood development within Canmore, and then develop more specific guidelines around what kind of details we would expect to see regarding development policy, servicing, implementation, et cetera, et cetera. And then lastly, we'd like to develop a set of procedural guidelines for application and review. We see this going hand in hand with policy. These guidelines would guide any applicant through the process of consultation, gathering information, design, review, submissions, circulation, what the public hearing looks like, things as such. And we feel that the guidelines will help establish clear expectations for all parties involved, including what is expected at each phase. So following submission, we would expect ASP, ARP bylaw amendments to take about 6 to 10 months. Following submission, depending upon the approach we take with conceptual schemes, could be a 3 to 6 month process after the application is received. And just to note, subdivision takes approximately 3 months.
So just so I understand, so after an ASP is approved, if there's requirement for a conceptual plan, that could then take another 6 months?
Depending upon which route we take for approvals, correct. There are models out there for joint applications, joint application of a ASP and a conceptual scheme. We see that conceptual schemes are more related to subdivision. They should happen closer when development takes place to stipulate details.
So that the conceptual plan or scheme then is more linked to the subdivision component of the development?
It's more closely related to subdivision, traditionally, in other municipalities,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
And so I'm going to run through this quickly, but I don't have a clock. Does that mean I have a lot of time? But I just wanted to outline what might exist in a sample table of contents. This is just the first level of contents. Obviously, there'd be graduated levels beyond this, but this takes into account the current vision and goals for Canmore, what we might expect to see in such a plan. And so you'd have a traditional administration section that speaks to purpose, speaks to amendment process. You'd have a context section that speaks to the geographic context, environmental context, defining characteristics of the area, existing land uses. And then you'd get into the land use concept or neighborhood development concept, depending upon which plan you're talking about. And that would set up your constraints and opportunities. And that would take into account all the studies that would be done for such plans to identify where and what is appropriate within that planning area. And then the largest section for any of these plans is the development policy section. And that gets to environment, cultural and heritage resources, mobility network, parks, urban design, green development, residential. And so you can imagine, based on the area, some of these categories might be removed. This is a bit of a catch-all here. So moving forward, we would also expect to see plans for servicing around water, stormwater, sanitary, emergency services and such. And then we'd have a section for implementation, which would outline clear goals, development phasing, off-site improvements, and if there is a bylaw amendment needed, such as with an ASP, ARP. And then lastly, there'd be appendices, which we would expect to see the full technical studies involved with, or included with. Excuse me. And so we can, this section's a bit about discussion, so please jump in if you have questions. Otherwise, we can address them at the end. We feel that there's minimal work needed to expand upon guidance from the MGA and MDP to align a policy for area structure plans and area redevelopment plans with Town of Canmore plans and policy. So we feel there's an opportunity right now to fill that void. And more importantly, set up what is expected where we see is a more pressing concern or a gap that requires more attention. We feel like it requires a bit more attention because this is the point at which we can establish the details to address public needs. As you can imagine, an area structure plan might set up high-level principles, but when you get to subdivision, we may have missed the opportunity to really outline what those details are regarding parks, regarding mobility, regarding a lot of the things that we say we care about. So we feel that the conceptual scheme phase is essential to have policy for. And moving forward, we intend to have low-level engagement as we develop this policy. We plan to consult with key stakeholders to obtain feedback. We want to gather all that feedback before the fall when we come to you all with a draft policy, set of policies. And then there's a question as to, okay, what if you have an applicant now who has an application pending, or they're in the works, and we've already approved a terms of reference. We intend to respect that terms of reference, that an ASP policy would not impact that TOR. So we would honor that moving forward. Where we still have a gap, though, is the conceptual scheme phase. And so because the standing terms of reference likely does not address conceptual schemes, that's the policy we would have to respect once it would come time for developing conceptual schemes.
So just to explore that a little bit. So as we know, there's a ASP terms of reference approved for Three Sisters some time ago, about a year ago, and
sure,
a lot of work has been undertaken towards that ASP. I don't know when it's expected the ASP would be ready to come to the town for consideration, but what I'm understanding is that this work that admin is proposing to do or is doing won't have any impact at all on the timelines associated to moving the current ASP work forward and getting
any work associated with ASP, no. We actually are providing that particular applicant with greater transparency in our process, just so they are clear on when it comes time to develop a conceptual scheme, they know what to expect. And because these types of plans are interconnected, we're also being transparent with what we would expect eventually with an ASP or an ARP, irregardless of the fact that they already have an approved TOR.
Good to understand. And in the normal course of events, once an ASP is approved, then there's a period of time where the landowner would be beginning to work on conceptual schemes or neighborhood plans or whatever post-approval of the ASP.
Right.
So this policy is intended to assist in that next phase of
yes,
planning approval.
Because one can imagine that certain areas of land could have a 20 to 30 year build out, right? So we would want to make sure that when it came time for that next parcel to be developed, we had something in place to help guide it, to help bring clarity around expectations and process.
So future phases, which might be spaced out over decades, would all feed back to whatever the conceptual scheme is approved and in place at the time of moving forward with that part of the development?
Well, the conceptual schemes that would be brought forward would have to respect the ASP that was approved.
Sure. But then that conceptual scheme would be in place for several years' worth of subdivisions and
The intention for that type of plan is, yes, through build-out to guide building, essentially, to guide all subdivision that takes place.
Okay. Councillor Comfort, do you have a question on this issue?
I do, I just wanted to understand or confirm what I think I heard, that there is the possibility to bring forward an ASP and a conceptual scheme concurrently. Is that right?
One could consider that. We've talked about that in planning. It would not necessarily relate to any current applications because of the scale. If you had an ARP or an ASP that was quite a modest scale, then, and it was expected that development was to take place essentially within 5 years, then those two could be looked at together, for sure.
Thank you.
Do you have more to present?
I have one more slide, so I'll
Okay.
get through that. And then open it up to more questions if you have them. So this just outlines next steps. I've spoken to the need for a workshop. We haven't set that yet, so hopefully that could take place in August. That's what we're shooting for. We are on the calendar for October 1st for draft policy review and November 5th for final policy review. We also, because conceptual schemes haven't necessarily been utilized here in Canmore, we don't have a fee structure associated with what that means. Obviously, there would be fees associated with it. We haven't determined what they are, so we have to work through that as well. One thing that we're actively doing also is developing terms of reference templates for studies that one would associate with an ASP or an ARP or a conceptual scheme. And then, as I had mentioned in the slide previously, we are strategically and intending to continue to consult with current applicants to ensure transparency moving forward. And that concludes. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. So on this slide, the draft policy, you're hoping to present to council beginning of October, and then a month later, final presentation. Is it expected that there'd be public hearings
Yes,
required on that?
I believe they're both on business meeting days.
Seems a little tight then.
It does, doesn't it?
To have the draft policy on October 1st.
Yeah.
Public hearings and back for third reading on the 5th. Seems a little tight, but anyone? Ms. DeSoto?
I'd like to confer with planning staff, but I wasn't aware that we needed a public hearing for the policy piece. We might want to do public engagement, but is that your plan, is to do a hearing, an actual public hearing? Would this be an amendment to a statutory document like the MDP or the LUB? So I don't
require one.
It wouldn't require a mandatory public hearing, so we
Okay.
wouldn't have to meet all of the, the 2-week advertising deadlines, et cetera.
Okay.
So we would be able to manage a tighter time frame.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I was mistaken on that.
I have a few questions that I might want to flesh out a bit of the information, but if other members of council have questions from the presentation or report. Just sort of an overall overarching question. So how was it that this process was initiated in the first place? I mean, I don't recall it being part of a council discussion or direction. This is something that planning identified as a need and initiated the work on independently.
Do you want to speak to that?
Anyone?
Through you, Your Worship, we had some previous applications that had come forward to council, and we identified through that process there were some additional information, additional procedures and processes that we needed to put in place in order to improve the process, both for the town as well as for the applicants. And we are trying to be responsive to the feedback that we received, both internally and externally, with regard to planning, the Planning and Development Department's process and procedure, setting out clear expectations for applicants on content of their submissions, as well as setting clear expectations for us as an administration with regard to the review process. So we're using some lessons learned from some previous experiences to improve the process moving forward.
Great, thank you for that. In the financial impacts, it's noted that significant capacity will be required to draft policy and processes related to both the SP and ARP and CS policy development. So that resource capacity, will it have a direct impact on other projects or other work? I mean, is there something that's going to have to fall off the table in planning department in order to do this work now, or?
Ms. Miller would best speak to that as well.
Through you, Your Worship, we have gone through and analyzed all of the work that is currently on the Planning and Development Department's dashboard, so to speak, and have prioritized the work based on the capacity of the department, with moving forward with this policy as being one of those priorities. So we have shifted workloads within the department to ensure that we were able to deliver on this particular policy piece within our current budget capacity and staff capacity. We have pushed out some work into 2020 in order to ensure that we're able to deliver on certain priorities within 2019.
So what sort of work are we pushing out to 2020 in order to do this?
Primarily, we've focused on aligning the staff's work assignments, so being clear about which members of staff are working on the priority projects of council versus managing the day-to-day applications within the department. So we previously had staff doing both, and that was creating some capacity challenges because you had individuals working on maybe very small-scale development applications like deck permits, and also trying to manage large-scale projects such as developing a policy. So we've been very clear about aligning work with specific members of staff and ensuring that staff who are leading large projects are dedicated 100% to those projects and are not required to do other tasks off the side of their desk. So some of the projects that we've looked at maybe pushing out to 2020 were not pending council priorities. There are a number of other projects that council had already identified that they wanted us to move forward in 2019. So if it wasn't one of those projects, we've pushed it out to 2020, as well as identify projects where the Planning and Development Department was identified as a stakeholder, and worked with those departments to see what timelines they were working with and to see where exactly they needed our input, and or whether it was actually a full commitment of all of 2019 and 2020. So we've just been clearer with our internal stakeholders about what level of capacity the planning department can contribute to other projects outside of our department.
Great, thanks for that. Just looking at the section of the MDP that references conceptual schemes 18.2.7, so notes the town may require the preparation approval by council of a detailed conceptual scheme concurrent with consideration of an application for land use amendment or subdivision. So that's clearly intended to be prepared for council at a future date. I mean, we talked a bit about it, but subdivision or other approval process.
Mm-hmm.
So do you know how we might apply the direction from the MDP regarding the timing of when a conceptual scheme may be required? So would that be within the policy? Trying to get a handle for the phases of these processes.
We are too, because we can imagine that there could be a vast array of scale, a range of scale, I should say, involved with such applications. And so we're working through a series of if this then that type statements that help us to outline how we would triage or how we would couple certain approaches. Again, we're anticipating that some of these applications, it might come down to the context of that application. And so we are in the process of interpreting, as you are, what the MDP states and figuring out what's best for us moving forward as a town. I don't have a direct answer for you yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Thanks. Councillor Seeley.
Thanks for your presentation, Mr. Welsh. Just about the greater transparency with conceptual schemes. Can you go into that a little bit? I want to understand that it's not going to create roadblocks or something that's more difficult when we get to that point.
Sure. So, as I had stated in the presentation, ARPs and ASPs do a good job to set up the principles by which you develop by. What we're missing now, currently, is what are the details of development that could meet those principles, can meet the goals. And so you could expect, I'll try to give a for instance, that we would like to see a certain number of parks or parks associated with certain walking distance from a development. That might happen at the ASP phase. Just a high-level policy statement as to what would be expected from the eventual development. In the conceptual scheme phase, we would like to see details on how that might be achieved, so that nothing's lost in the process. And so you can imagine that any developer would likely run through those steps anyhow to test feasibility and viability of development. And so we need something in place to help us also vet that, to make sure that development is in line throughout every step of the process with our MDP. And so we don't see it as additional work, we see it as sort of transparency going both ways. And certain details appropriate for certain times, right? We just need to see that detail throughout the whole process, from ASP to actual home construction, for instance. We don't particularly have that picture today, so that's what these policies. One of the aspects that these policies hope to get to for town staff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have heard, of course, from Three Sisters Mountain Village, their concern about this policy process interfering with the ASP process that's underway, and I'm hearing pretty clearly that that's not the expectation.
Correct.
Correct. Arguably, there is an approved ASP in place for the resort center. So what I'm understanding that if the landowner chose to move forward with the currently approved ASP, then this policy for conceptual schemes would assist in the planning for that development under the current ASP.
Yes.
Right.
And that's from 2004, I believe.
Right, 2004. I don't have other questions at this time. Any members of council with questions? Seeing none, thanks very much for your presentation today and helping us and others in the community to better understand what the intent and goal of this work is.
You're welcome. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Move on now to item D2, the Bow Valley Regional Housing Needs Assessment. Mr. Fish.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council.
I think it's the first time you've presented to council in your new position.
That's correct, yes.
Well, we won't
Pretty
go so
excited.
easily on you.
Sorry, I was not able to prepare this for you sooner. All right, yes. So for the last year and a half, a group has been working on a Bow Valley Region housing needs assessment. It's been a collaboration between Bow Valley Regional Housing as well as Canmore Community Housing Corporation, with input from the various municipalities, Banff, the MD, the ID, and the town of Canmore. The two lead agencies are Bow Valley Regional Housing and CCHC, and they ran the RFP process and selected Headwater Group, the consulting team that worked on creating the report. So I'm going to start with the end. If you remember nothing else from this presentation, the number to take away, because I know we have a history of being attracted and attached to the numbers. So the number in 2016 was 508. So these are households in need of housing, of more affordable housing. So for rental, that would be households that are spending more than 32% of their income on housing costs. For ownership, it's 30%. I think I have those right. Either way, or it's the other way around. It's 30 or 32%. In total, there are 508 households in Canmore. So these are Canmore numbers. It's important to note that all of their data is based on the 2016 census, which now is a little bit old, but that is the methodology that the consultant has used across the province. So it's a robust methodology, and they felt that that was the most defendable approach. So since 2016, since the census, there have been a number of initiatives that have changed the playing field a little bit. So again, I'll remind you the rental demand was 360 units, but since that time, new developments have received occupancy and are fully occupied, both being MacArthur Place and the Peaks development. So bringing close to 90 units of affordable rental housing to market, as well as some market housing in the Peaks development. Ownership, the demand was 148 units, and since that time, Hawke's Bend has been occupied, again fully occupied, and with 49 units of ownership units there. So there have been some important and satisfying new developments that have helped, but the update, somewhat anecdotally, is that demand continues to be high. Now this is somewhat less anecdotally when we look at CCHC, which still has a waiting list of over 100 people on it, and that's a combination of rental and ownership. So the affordable housing issue is not going away despite our efforts. The report also looked into the future, and it created a growth projection, again, for the entire Bow Valley, and it was based on a number of factors, largely looking at economic development in the area, as that's one of the key components to driving growth in a community. Looking at a North America-wide set of categories of economic activity, Canmore's two economic drivers, the two biggest ones, are accommodation and food services and arts, entertainment, and recreation. Somewhat interestingly, sectors that are not key drivers are retail trade, personal care services, construction, or even healthcare. This was somewhat shocking, and we queried them on this, and they further clarified that per capita employment in these sectors is lower relative to the Calgary region. Somewhat surprising, but that's the important point to this. I'll come back to on what those key economic drivers are. So there were 5 projections. Interestingly, they almost all, 4 out of the 5 projections include faster than historical growth since the millennium. So You can see sort of the historical trend line at the base there, and then you can see a number of scenarios that they looked at. So that the base projection, which is actually the middle orange projection there, looks at Canmore having a population in 2027, a permanent population of just over 18,000. So a fair bit of growth coming our way. They believe this is two factors are really underpinning this growth. The main one being as the community grows, there is less leakage to other communities. So as the community gets bigger, we're more able, residents are more able to meet all of their needs within the community and less likely to go outside the community. So basically growth begets more growth. The second piece that they see factoring in quite highly is the commercial growth cap in Banff and limitations on its ability to expand and provide services. And they see an increasing spillover to Canmore area. Housing prices. This is a quick graphic that shows, and so you can see Canmore is towards the right, close to Toronto in some of our values. So we hear a lot about Vancouver and Toronto in the media. And they have an impressive suite of legislative tools to address affordable housing, almost all of which are not available to us here in this fine province. You can see that the median single detached house price is $895,000, townhouse $673,000, an apartment $435,000, and the rental apartment was $1,450 for a one-bedroom at that point. Yes, I would have to confirm. They did update some of those statistics, I think, with housing availability data from the CCHC housing survey, but it's an acute problem.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Okay, yes, so sorry, those were updated to 2017. That's right. So where this leaves us, there's a lot going on in this slide here, and I'll try and talk about it. So I'll start with the ownership median income. So of people who own homes in Canmore, the median household income is $117,000 a year. Of renters, that median household income is $71,000 a year. These are 2016 numbers. So based on what that translates to in affordability, so the first three are in home ownership, and a single detached at a median price of roughly $900,000, the income required to support that mortgage household for the year is getting close to $160,000 a year. So that's got the red light in terms of the median income only being $117,000. A condominium townhouse development is a yellow light. So the median price, $673,000. The income required is about $119,000, with the median income being $117,000 for those that own homes. It's on the edge of affordability, meaning half of people making that, half of households that own property can afford a townhouse. The other half cannot.
Mr. Fish, what's the assumption on the amount of money available for a down payment? Is that based on a...
I don't know those off the top of my head. It may be in the report specifically. I think it's probably the 5% and a certain amount of income.
It's 10%, and I believe this is based on the 2016 mortgage rules. So this was before the threshold rules came into play. Is that the correct term for that? You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah.
The income stress test.
Yeah, the income stress test. So this was previous to the income stress test being implemented in federally.
Right, that was my recollection as well, the 10%. Thank you.
So with respect to rental housing, and I'm sorry, these are very hard to read, I guess very quickly, the apartment, the income required would be $76,000 to purchase the median apartment at $435,000. So apartments are generally affordable to at least 50% of people, households, two-income households.
What's the difference between, in this study, between a condominium and an apartment?
Yeah, so they use the word condominium in this graphic. I think of it more as a townhouse, and the apartment more as the internal corridor with apartments serviced off that. So apologies on the confusion there.
Okay.
As for rental housing, so the average income required for the studio or one bedroom is close to the average renter's household income. So generally, studios and one bedrooms are affordable to at least half of households. The 2 and 3 bedroom are not, at needing an income of $74,000 and $94,000 per year. So as I think people are aware, there are not many studios and one bedrooms available in the community, with a greater number of 2 and 3 bedrooms for rent, but the higher prices. Just quickly, the last piece is household distribution. So when we're trying to look, household income distribution is what that is. When we're trying to look at the affordability piece, as we all know, these are based on median, but there are a number of people in the community, and so Canmore is the purple bars there, with 27% of households in Canmore making over $150,000 a year. So that highlights the sort of disparity that we have in Canmore in terms of there are some households that have quite high incomes, and then there are quite a few that have lower incomes. So when we project into the future and look, this is a graphic that is Bow Valley wide, and so it talks about needing 1,700 new housing units over the next 10 years. For Canmore, that equates to 1,200 new housing units, with non-market representing 134 of that, rental being 103, and ownership being 31. So the majority of those units are anticipated to be market housing units. But I'm going to come back to the economic drivers in the community. So when we look at the type of growth that we're seeing in the community, accommodation and food services, arts and entertainment and recreation, there's not a statistical link shown in the report, but they're generally not at the 150,000 plus end of the spectrum in those sectors. So the important piece here is that the income required to purchase a home in Canmore is actually quite difficult to find in the areas that we are expecting to see the economic growth. So some of those other areas, construction, healthcare, that are not our key economic drivers projected for the future, they are better suited to potentially meeting the affordability criteria. So some key observations from the consultants as they went through the report. The continued growth of non-permanent housing, so recreational property ownership and our limited land are going to require a different approach to planning new development to ensure that we're providing the kind of housing that the community needs, both the size, quality, specifications, things like that. I mean, they went further and were quite blunt in saying that single detached housing will not help with housing affordability. And therefore, we need a fairly significant change in the direction we're headed if we're going to have any meaningful hope of addressing affordability issues as we move forward with our growth.
Councillor Comfort, do you have a question?
Yeah, so regarding that diversity of housing types, are we exploring that in trying to create beyond what we have now in terms of housing types? Not just affordable housing, but I don't know, I know in Toronto, friends of mine Their kids just bought like a 650 square foot apartment for the couple and their first child. And they're delighted, and it cost, I don't know, $790,000, and they thought that was a deal. So are we looking at that types of housing, at people having to give up their dreams of, you know, the half acre with triple garage and so on? What are we doing in regards to what's possible?
So the short answer is yes, although there have been a couple of subdivisions in the last 15 years that have included single-family homes. The majority have not. So the majority have focused on multifamily, townhouse, condominium-style apartment dwellings. Some of the challenge is that the market has responded by taking those to a very high-end 2,000, 4,000 square foot townhouse units. And so that has really compromised our ability to deliver on that. Short answer is yes, we are trying to always explore options for more affordable, more diverse housing. The market is definitely pushing us away from any form of affordability. There is very little that we see, and you can see that in a number of areas close to the downtown where the fourplex units have gotten larger, the third floor gets larger, the finishings are higher. Everyone is insisting on providing at least a single car garage and often a double car garage. So the market is really working against us in many ways here.
Thank you very much.
Just on the same line of discussion, I noted in your report the same information. The housing study suggests new development should be smaller affordable apartments, purpose-built rental housing, and decreasing single-family and high-end condominiums. And in the light of the previous discussion today around new ASP being planned for Three Sisters, I'm just curious if that suggestion, if that direction from the housing study has been shared with Three Sisters in regards to trying to inform their ASP to reflect that important point.
Short answer is no, it has not, but, and we'll come to this in the next steps, the key is to try and bring all of this forward to the entire community, not one developer, but in existing areas of town, in new development areas in town, ways to try and, so I was going to run through exactly, as you were saying, the three key points related to this first piece that the consultant recommends are smaller affordable apartments, purpose-built rental housing, and we've seen some of that. It's exciting to see the Peaks development on Palliser Trail, as well as the Coast Apartments and the Canmore 159 initiative, all purpose-built rental. So Council has made some good headway in there. The third point, as you pointed out, is decreasing single-family and high-end condominiums. And so we have generally been decreasing, although there are currently a number of single families on the market now, and high-end condominiums. And we have had much less success in influencing those. So I think that will, well, I'll come to it here in a moment.
Okay,
as we move on. So one of the other key observations is mathematically, we and Banff, so this is Bow Valley-wide, need to supply 22 units per year of affordable housing just to keep pace with that growth, never mind making up the 508 units at the start. So I think 22 units a year doesn't sound like much, but in actual efforts, it is a huge amount. If we think about the 15 years it took to realize the Hawks Bend development, you know, we're getting 3 units of perpetually affordable housing as part of a density bonus program. In Stewart Creek Phase 3, we're getting another 4 units here on 7th and 7th. These tough decisions are tough to add up to 22 units per year. Yeah. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. The final point that the consultants specifically recommended was a better understanding of employee housing. We've talked a lot about employee housing, and so far we haven't been able to deliver on that. Perhaps with the land use bylaw rewrite, we will be able to move some of that forward. They specifically, I think they're primarily referring to Banff. Two of the sub-points to that bullet are around indicators of significant housing issues for employees, specifically overcrowding, I guess especially in some older properties too, where safety starts to come into a concern. I think that's primarily in Banff, but as the service economy grows in Canmore, I think we're experiencing growth of some of those factors as well. The other specific recommendation that they have that we've sort of struggled with and is not on our current work plan, but is a survey of employees and employers to get a clear picture of housing condition and safety issues. And we have some good ideas about what the housing issues are for employees, but we don't have a detailed handle on that. They make a number of recommendations. I'll try and go through this quickly. Allowing secondary and accessory suites in most residential neighborhoods. Work that is underway on the land use bylaw amendment, but highlights the importance of seeing that work through in a timely manner. Requiring employee housing for new developments. I feel like I wrote these, but I didn't. They're the consultant's words. So again, highlighting the importance of the work on the land use bylaw that's in place right now. Interestingly, restricting short-term vacation rentals, tourist homes. This is an issue that's in communities across Canada. There's been a lot of reports. Was reading today about a report in Toronto where they estimate thousands of long-term rental units have been pulled out of the long-term rental market and put into the short-term rental market. So the importance of continuing enforcement and good regulations on those. Amendments to the land use bylaw to enable emergency and supportive living. I don't think we actually have many hurdles in the bylaw to that, but we want to make sure that that's in place. Encouraging mixed-use developments. We do have a number of bylaw requirements for those in some commercial areas, so I think we're fairly progressive there. Three interesting ones. A recommendation to increase the supply of land for development. So market forces is one of the most powerful tools that we do have, and if we make a whole bunch of more land available for development, increasing the supply may decrease the prices. I have some concerns about that in the long term as it relates to the urban growth boundary, but I won't get into that now. Facilitate the development approval process. We know that long development approval processes add risk and cost to developers, which are then passed on to eventual purchasers or occupants. And then finally, supporting infill housing developments. I don't think I have to mention any by name, but that's another opportunity in some situations.
Yeah, and of course our experience there has, I think, also not shown great progress in reducing the affordability of housing. I mean, infill housing, in my experience, tends to be pricey.
Yeah, I mean, thinking back to that chart where you look at Canmore relative to other Canadian communities and on the Vancouver and Toronto area, I mean, we can see it when you see fourplex units in South Canmore going for almost $1 million for a fourplex unit. So the increase in density there is more affordable than a single family home, which might be $2.5 million, but it's hardly affordable at $1 million for a fourplex townhouse unit. So in conclusion, the consultants had a section called Recommended Strategy, and they concluded that by saying the next steps are to collaborate on how housing stakeholders are going to work together to address housing need. So it's a very broad statement, but that is exactly what we plan to do. So more specifically for the town of Canmore, what that means is that this report is going to guide some of our activities, looking at specific initiatives, things like the land use bylaw amendment, and more specifically to look at an update to the Comprehensive Housing Action Plan. With our workload, we know that that is a priority item. It might be a little bit more towards the end of 2019 and into 2020 rather than wrapping up at the end of 2019, but that is very much seen as the next step where we will update it and have a list of whether that's 5, 10, or 15 initiatives that will help guide administration at the town as well as CCHC over the next 5 years. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions as best I can about the report.
I pretty much asked questions as you went along, but Councillor Comfort?
Yes, you mentioned that other municipalities, other jurisdictions have access to tools that we don't in Alberta. Can you give me an example of those? Because I think we hear from the public periodically about those, and they wonder why we don't use those mechanisms.
Yeah, I mean, some of the main ones are abilities to have rental only, like permanent rental, dedicated rental developments. We don't have the ability to enforce that in Alberta. In Ontario they do. I just read a report out of Victoria where they're considering legislation. They have the authority to, and now the city is looking at that. So to basically enforce purpose-built rental. We've tried working around that through other limitations, parking requirements, things like that. But that's an example of one tool. So basically controlling the occupancy of it. There are others that are related to funding affordable housing. So British Columbia is anticipating to receive $115 million in vacancy and speculative tax, the new tax in British Columbia, and that money will then be channeled directly into affordable housing initiatives. So BC is a big place, but $115 million goes a long way. British Columbia also has a real estate transfer tax, and some of that money, I believe, is also turned into affordable housing initiatives. So there are some financial tools and some legislative tools. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
That sounds pretty bleak as far as we're concerned, I think. But thanks anyway.
Well, I will say quickly, I mean, the 3 purpose-built rental projects in Canmore, so despite our legislative environment in which we find ourselves, we're doing good work. Council is doing good work. They're making some hard decisions, and units are getting built on the ground. Similarly, through partnerships with the development industry and large developers in the town, it's not all bleak. There are some good initiatives happening.
Sorry, that was the second part of my question. So what kind of incentives can we offer to a developer? I don't know. So when they come forward with a development, is it possible for us to say, well, you know, if you put 2 units of affordable housing in that project, we could probably give you those modified roof lines or smaller driveways or whatever it is?
Yeah. So the good news, a little bit again, is that we are trying to do that. We are doing it already. The sustainability screening process in 2007 yielded a development in Three Sisters, which has struggled, but will hopefully be realized, where there was some additional density and building height, roof line, exactly as you're talking about, approvals that were granted in exchange, in this case, for some cash towards affordable housing. More recently and somewhat more successfully or tangibly, we have had other developments where they have proposed affordable housing to offset some other incentives, usually around size of units, density, those sorts of changes to buildings. We also have our density bonusing section in the land use bylaw. It hasn't received a lot of uptake, but it has received some. I mentioned earlier the 7th and 7th and Lookout Ridge projects. As well, our partnership with Spring Creek Mountain Village on providing 5% of their new units as perpetually affordable housing. So there have been some successes that way. But, you know, I think we need to look at expanding that if we're going to keep up to the needs as the community grows.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. The other thing they have in BC, Mr. Fish, is the primary resident grant. So in addition to what you're speaking of, and I thought it was $150 million.
What I read today was 115, but
Okay,
it's early days. They don't have.
Well, yeah, but they budgeted for like 75 million or 85 million, and they got like 115, which was what it was. There was. I'm stuck listening to the CBC when I'm in the Kootenays. Anyways, One of the recommendations that came out of the housing needs study was further data collection. And I was wondering if you've had an opportunity to consider how we might keep up the data collection moving forward, so that when it comes time in 5 years to do this again, that we are ready to pull all the pins and go. And is it something that we could do? And it's my understanding from the consultant that we could perhaps employ a local organization to upkeep that data or do that internally at the town. I think the Biosphere was a name that was dropped, since they're collecting data for us already. But I was wondering if you'd put any thought into that.
At this point, no, in any detailed sense. These statistics are largely based, as I said, on the 2016 census data, so it's a matter of accessing that data to keep a similar data source. I do remember through the housing, I can't remember the initiative where we looked at housing in the community, and there was a consultant team that came from largely from Whistler, yeah. And I do remember Mr. Tim Wake's comment that your greatest housing needs indicator was your wait list.
Yeah, I
exactly.
understand that.
And so as we've grown the spectrum of differing offerings, you can see if we have a high demand for 3 bedrooms and no demand for 1 bedrooms, or vice versa, that's a really good indicator. So more directly to answer your question, no, we haven't thought about that. It would be part of the comprehensive housing action plan where we would start looking at the need to update that data.
I would agree with you that the wait lists are a great way to determine what next we need to build, like what would the next couple of projects look like. But from looking for grants and trying to find partnership opportunities, the statistics are deeply important. The province won't look at any of the projects we put forward from BVRH unless we have accurate statistics, which is why we've had a seniors project funded, because we had done a short-term seniors housing needs study. But now that we have the full needs study, we'd be able to push more, in my opinion. In speaking about the piece of the puzzle that's missing in terms of employee housing, I'm wondering if that actually has to be a Town of Canmore initiative. If employers are desperate for staff due to the housing crisis, I wonder if it might be something we could partner with the business community in looking at paying for. I know that in Whistler, I believe it's the chamber there, actually pays fully for the employee housing needs assessment on an annual basis. But it certainly, it was disappointing that we didn't get the ability to get more accurate data, definitely for the needs assessment, because that's a large piece of the puzzle from a seasonal housing aspect that we're kind of missing in this. And what was my next question? I think that the one thing we might want to think about further is the numbers in the needs assessment with regards to people with special needs and developmental disabilities. So I believe that the numbers, we're missing 22 units, and we have 0 right now. So although the needs assessment speaks for affordable housing, it's not just affordable housing for our workforce, it's for people with cognitive disability, et cetera, too.
Well, maybe I'll just quickly mention that
Yeah.
although the report looked, or the assessment looked at a wide range of types of housing, I focused on the ones that the municipality has a bit more control in, but
Yeah.
absolutely those conversations, I think that's a very useful tool for Bow Valley Regional Housing, so they can
Absolutely.
advocate for more specifically the needs that they have.
Yep, and there's partnership opportunities with different organizations that potentially are there as well. I don't think I had, I noticed in your briefing document that you stated that the town of Canmore was paying $30,000 for the needs assessment for their portion, but I recollect in the 2016 CCHC budget that that was itemized as something that CCHC was going to be paying for. So I was wondering if at some point, not necessarily today, it could be articulated to me how and when that switched organizations and when we made that adjustment and approved that in the budget.
okay, I will endeavor to
I'm not
do that.
expecting that to happen right
Yeah.
now. Other than that, it's a long time coming, and I'm glad we finally have it, and thank you for your work on it.
Welcome.
Just one final thought, in regards to one part of your, one observation in your report, and you're referencing the commercial growth cap in Banff and the expected spillover to Canmore and how that may affect future situation here. There's been sort of loose conversation with the town of Banff over the last several years around trying to work together on addressing particularly employee housing, but we always hit the wall of the need to reside clause in the park. I don't know if you've ever had any conversations with planning in the town of Banff around collectively working or approaching the federal government, Parks Canada, to consider, you know, special dispensation in the Bow Valley, because, you know, I think the number I've heard is there's 1,000 Canmore residents that commute to work in Banff. I don't know if that's accurate, but I've certainly heard that from well-placed sources in Banff. It's just another factor that I think we have to bear in mind when we're talking about housing needs in the Bow Valley. You know, that national park boundary does present some challenges.
I think the biggest problem is availability of land in both communities.
Yeah.
But I think that's perhaps even more acute in Banff, given their incredibly small 4 square kilometer footprint. There are precious few opportunities for new housing development in Banff, even if it were to loosen those restrictions and enable more flexibility there. But it's worth considering for sure.
Yeah, just an open flow in housing and workers would be more usual.
Kind of a free trade agreement.
Free trade agreement, exactly.
Employee housing.
Maybe we should call a summit. Councillor McCallum, did you?
Yeah, I was actually going to add to that. So Cascade House in Banff experiences much higher vacancy rates than the Bow River Lodge because of the need to reside clause. So we're actually seeing continued drop in our vacancy numbers, drop in our vacancy numbers month over month because of the need to reside clause. So that building will never actually, in my opinion, and others' opinion, actually be filled to its full potential ever. It will lose money.
No, just for future discussion. I don't think there are any other questions this time from members of council, so thanks very much for the overview and report.
Quick quiz, what was the number?
508. What's in a number, really? Moving on then to item D3, the Bow Valley Parent Link reorganization. Ms. de Montigny. Ms. Brown.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council. My name is Christine DeMontney. I work at the Bow Valley Parent Link, and I've come to you today to talk about the Bow Valley Parent Link's departmental review. So what I'm going to talk about today is the background information about Parent Link, looking at why we decided to make this change, details about the departmental review, as well as anticipated outcomes, and then a timeline for our changes. So Bow Valley Parent Link is a preventative program that builds capacity in the community for early childhood development. We offer parent education and supports, developmental screens, information and referrals, and community-based early childhood development programs and services. We have 2 main sites in Banff and Canmore with a satellite site in Exshaw. And although the majority of our funding is provincially funded, opportunity for Town of Canmore to have a provincial municipal partnership with preventative-based programming aimed at early childhood education. So as you know, Ms. Rogers, General Manager of Corporate Services, has presented to you on the organizational review of the town of Canmore that they're going through right now. We use this concept to look at the Bow Valley Parent Link departmental review as well. So we identified areas that required review while aligning with the town of Canmore organizational review. So we went from, we want to go from growing community interest in early childhood development to growing community knowledge and capacity in early childhood development. We want to focus on quantity, go away from focusing on quantity of available programs to providing staff with tools to create responsive, adaptable, and flexible programs. We want to go from being operations-based to strategically addressing municipal and community goals. And we wanted to go from limiting opportunity for growth and professional development to investing in skills and development and succession planning for our staff. We want to go from reactive policies, being reactive with policies and procedures, to creating policies and procedures that align with the mandate and goals. And we wanted to go from being limited by our budget to seeking creative financial efficiencies. We are changing the Bow Valley Parent Link's schedule to allow time for the following things. We want to increase staff capacity to build connections in municipalities and within the community. The new schedule looks at programming from a Bow Valley-wide perspective while also identifying the uniqueness of each community. We want staff to be able to attend municipal meetings and share the early childhood development perspective, and then build capacity within other departments as well. So for example, we have been invited to sit at the table for parks or playground development with the Parks Department, and also the rec center redevelopment, so play space inside inside that building, the rec center building, and then creating and collaborating on a space for young families to be active, so collaborating with the Elevation Play staff and creating programs. Some other opportunities we're looking at is looking at being involved in pathway and bus systems, as well as policy and land use change, so affordability and secondary suites, which affect our population. We're also open to being involved in other projects related to young families that come up within the municipalities. We also want to leave room for the unknown, so for staff to be able to be flexibly adapting to the community needs that are ever changing, and being strategic when planning our schedules, and also staying up to date on research and best practices within early childhood development and incorporating these into our schedule. We have redefined each position to connect with municipalities and find out what the unique needs of each community. The positions will have more focus to help support building capacity in the community, and all positions will have focus on assessing gaps and needs in the community as well. And dedicated time will be spent connecting with different agencies in both communities, as well as the MD. We're looking at streamlining processes. For example, we have already analyzed our food budget, which I will touch on a little bit later. And then we have 2 positions dedicated to creating this community hub program with the support of the entire team. This program is part of our Stay and Play drop-in program that we already currently run. And the idea that this program will have more focus. We want to invite different agencies to create this community hub idea, as well as other town departments. So for example, Alberta Health Services, speech and physio professionals, dietitians, mental health, and then with town departments, inviting the fire hall during Fire Prevention Week, bylaw to educate on bylaws affecting this population, and then parks as well for different ideas that they might gather on new playgrounds in our communities. These are just some of the few ideas that we have. However, we also want to hear from young families and what they need. And by doing that, we will also bring in other experts so we can be most impactful for this young population. Another area that was identified was additional staff was needed to be trained on educational programs to address the changing needs of the community. Another part of the departmental review is the strategic use of resources. So by partnering with other departments, as I've already mentioned, we'll be able to collaborate and reach our goals. By sharing staff, so for example, the childcare staff with Elevation Place, we can create efficiencies between departments for that hiring process. We also want to understand what other departments are doing for professional development and sharing our professional development opportunities with other departments as well. We want to partner with Elevation Place to utilize Little Bear's Den and presentation space, and eventually the rec center. It's important for us to keep young families in the Bow Valley to ensure a vibrant and diverse community. We want to share our expertise and knowledge of young families to the larger community and to the municipality to support this idea. There are several anticipated outcomes that come from this departmental review. We are looking at tightening up on processes and having clear documentation. So ParentLink analyzed our food budget recently. We met with Alberta Health Services dietitian, as well as looking at the new Canadian Food Guide. We wanted to better align with these recommendations. So based on initial assessments, there was a cost savings of at least 6.5%, and this may increase as we receive additional donations from community sources, and our program schedule is adjusted as well. These savings will be reallocated into our ParentLink programs. So starting in the fall and based on our new schedule, we will also save on transportation costs. We're also looking at offering programs that are sustainable and flexible to meet the changing community needs. We're interested in not overloading our staff schedules so they have time for the unexpected as those community needs arise. We want to have changes in schedule and position to allow for staff to be actively listening to the community and then flexibly being able to meet these needs. So for a timeline, June we've spent time meeting with Town of Canmore departments. In July, our plan is to develop a communication plan and focus on internally training staff. And then in August, communicating to the public and then having a celebration to the public or for the public. So look for an invite to that celebration at the end of August. We will send that out to you. And then September, we will be launching our new schedule and new positions and listening to feedback from the community. Any questions? Any questions?
Thanks very much for that overview. There was one note in your report at the bottom of page 2 of your report, and the next page, Bow Valley ParentLink will no longer offer concurrent programs in multiple municipalities. And I don't know if the intent or the expectation then is that young families, parents from Banff, for instance, would come to Canmore to take advantage of a certain program and vice versa. So rather than duplicating in two communities, is that what's informing that decision?
Yes, part of what's informing that decision. We want to have diverse programming, so making sure that we have programs that are relevant to Banff and to Canmore. But by not duplicating the services, we're freeing up some staff time to be able to focus on professional development and looking at just other ways that we can be impactful to the communities. So yes, that is
Great.
What our plan is.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
There was another part of the report that caught my attention. Talking about the program assistants who are still below the living wage. And I thought during the budget discussion...
That's what I thought. I was actually looking.
Yeah, I thought the small increase that was approved as part of the budget meant that all of the employees there would be at the very least at living wage. So
I'm
that's
going to
not
let Ms.
happened.
Brown answer this.
No, so the increase that we got for a ParentLink budget in 2019, that wasn't for actual staff wages, that was to maintain us on the benefits, the town of Canmore benefits. So we did do a bit of an increase because we got a 2% provincial grant increase, and that went to the program assistant wages. But the ParentLink program is not on the town of Canmore staffing grid. So what we did for the program assistants, when we got the 2% increase, we looked at comparatives. So we looked to see if we were on the staffing grid, what would those wages look like? And the ones that needed to be moved the most, that were the furthest behind, those were the ones that we moved with the provincial increase.
But there's still some room for improvement there.
That's right, absolutely.
Councillor Comfort?
Actually, that was my question also, but I have another question.
Go ahead.
So my other question is, given that the return on investment for early childhood development is something like between 5 and 7.5%, I think it's money well spent, incredibly well spent, in fact. So you're never going to get an argument from me. I wonder if you would consider perhaps. I know in the past we brought in a speaker who was particularly inspirational to me when I was a school board trustee, and many of the other people in the room. Ann Cooper she's retired now from Revelstoke, but I don't think there was a dry eye in the house, and also she made us all laugh as well as cry. So that kind of thing can be fabulous for staff. Is there any capacity, or if I could perhaps talk somebody into sponsoring it, which is possible, and you never know, would there be any appetite for your organizing that? All it would involve is booking a room, and that's about it.
Yes, thank you. So we do organize quite a bit of, there is professional development that happens at this point. We're hoping to build a little bit more into our schedule, so there's absolutely appetite for that. Are you thinking specifically that speaker to come in?
Oh, I think she's living
You're
quietly
retired.
in retirement now.
Okay.
But someone like that was just, the stories that she told, the anecdotes that she told, and she's a terrible singer, but she said, I'm going to sing anyway because it's what I do. And she was also someone who was converted. You know, she initially said, I do K-12, and that's all I care about. And here's what happened to me. Here's my story. So I think it's a pretty unique tale that she told, but it certainly reflected what's possible. And
Right.
there's lots of dry speakers who talk about theory and all of that good
Yes.
stuff, which is important too. But to the population at large in the community, I think people like that are very valuable. So just a thing, and we need to look after that money, people.
Bring it
Just
up at
saying.
budget time. Councillor Mara?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I was just curious if you did any conversing with the library with some of your childhood programs. You said you talked to Elevation Place. Was there any consideration giving to programming and partnering with the library?
Yeah, so the library is actually one of our partners, and we do talk to them quite regularly about collaborating on different programs, and we've collaborated in the past in different programs, and they're quite open for us to use their space as well.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Thank you.
If there's no other questions, comments from members of council, thanks very much for being here.
Thank
With
you.
this report, I have to say, I can remember back in when this was initiated, because I happened to be on council at that time, so 2006 or so, and there was a lot of uncertainty about what exactly we were getting ourselves into, but it's proven to be a really valuable opportunity, and I've certainly enjoyed the opportunities I've had to be at ParentLink along with other members of council. It's always so much fun to be with the young families and the young kids particularly. And I've been able to see the same experience, but from a different set of eyes when I visit my daughter in New Zealand, and she has 2 wee tykes, and she goes to something like ParentLink in the town where she lives, and so I'm there as a grandpa. And I mean, it's a really important opportunity for young families, and I'm proud that we're involved in this program and in some ways leading in the program. So thanks for all the work you and your co-workers are doing on that.
Thank you.
And I think we still have time to delve into item D4, camping on municipal lots. And who's presenting? Mr. Burt, don't you look good?
Thank you. Don't hear that every day. You look good as well, Mayor Bowman.
Thank you.
I also have Travis Reynolds, our summer outreach research worker, here to answer any questions you may have. So, just wanted to provide an update on camping on municipal lands and kind of what the boots on the ground are seeing, being me and a few other officers. We began conducting our patrols on June 5th. And actually, maybe to backtrack, we spent a couple of weeks with FCSS staff out conducting outreach in the Panhandle area. So we wanted to give people a heads up about the council decision, what was going on, when signs were going up. We didn't want to catch anybody off guard. But we wanted to be clear that when peace officers showed up in the morning, the tickets would be issued in that area. What I heard was people were really appreciative of that approach. They really liked to have the opportunity. They appreciated not being caught off guard, and they got to tell a bit of our story. And maybe I'll let Travis share a few more of the stories. What our department has been doing with the extremely limited resources we have is, as time permits, we start a morning camping patrol. It actually takes me back to what I did about 10 or 12 years ago, just in different areas. So generally what we are doing is we're taking the approach of hitting areas in town where we have received complaints of RVs parked on the street overnight and people that are staying in their RVs, and we're also hitting up I'm calling it the Panhandle parking area. In the Panhandle parking area, since the signs have gone up, it changed drastically. I think most of you have likely been by there and seen the change that's occurred. We have issued 46 tickets, and those tickets are purely a parking ticket for park contrary to a sign or park prohibited by sign. We have been patrolling and doing counts through Elevation Place, Home Hardware, which is private property, Save on Foods, which is private property, so no enforcement there. The downtown lot, so I refer to the downtown lot, is in behind us, and also I call it the Miners Union Hall lot, or sometimes people call it the BMO lot. And then we've started to receive complaints of people sleeping in their vehicles or parking their RVs overnight on River Road, and also on Kananaskis Way. So the approach that we're taking in those areas, because it's not purely parked contrary to a sign, is to knock on doors, wake people up, and see why they're there and what their story is. We will run the license plates first to determine if they've received a warning. What I can tell you is every license plate I've run down there, people haven't received a warning, and probably 80 to 85% of the people I'm speaking to are people that are just passing through. I'm on my way west, I'm on my way east, I'm just here for a night, I'm going wherever else. And I always ask them, so where are you going? Well, I'm going to Jasper, I'm going here, I'm going there. So you know in Jasper, you can't stay in your RV overnight. Yeah, I know, I'm getting a campground there. So we are moving them on their way. What we do is we create a warning so I can pull it up on my smartphone to see if they've been there. And then the other 20% or so, quite often I recognize the people already because of the outreach work that we had done in the Panhandle. So we just have a chat with them and say, we are branching out from the Panhandle. We're now starting to receive more complaints. So this is your warning. You need to move on. If you want to tell the story, I've got Travis's card. I always give him Travis's card and say, Travis will meet with you. He'll buy you a coffee. He'll get your story, and this is your opportunity to influence the decision with council that will be coming back in August or September. One interesting story that I would share, we received a complaint about an RV that had been parked just in behind Dave's Dry Cleaning, so the downtown lot, and it had been parked there for quite a long time. And I never know what to think when people tell me quite a long time. This one kind of blew me away. So here's the approach I take, is we roll up, knock on the window, and everybody goes like this right away. I say, okay, first of all, you're not going to get a ticket, so can we have a chat? Oh, yes, absolutely. What's your story? Where are you from? How long have you been here? Well, I came from wherever. I worked at Sunshine for a while. Now I'm working somewhere as a rock guide, and I got tired of paying too much of my rent. And I've been here for about 4 years. I'm like, well, in Canmore? He's like, no, in the downtown lots. I'm like, what? You've been here for about 4 years? Yeah, but I explained the situation, what's going on, told him he couldn't be here. And he said, okay, I'm good with that. He didn't tell me where he was going, obviously. Sorry? Well, it could be. So again, just wanted to give you a quick update that it's been overall positive interactions with us. And again, when we're in the Panhandle a lot, we're viewing it no different than, honestly, someone that's in a 2-hour parking zone or no parking or no stopping zone. So that's the brief update I have. I thought you might want to just hear what's going on. And we're probably out 3 or 4 mornings a week just giving staff resources. So that's what we've been up to. And if you have any questions for Travis, I will turn it over to him.
I don't know
myself.
if you wanted to just give us a few minutes of your observations. I do have one question, though, for you, Mr. Bird, and it's not really directly related to the Panhandle and the work you're doing there, although it's connected in a way. So I just want to understand how it works. If a private property owner has people staying on their property, my understanding is that they can arrange to have those vehicles towed without having to work through bylaw or RCMP.
Not so much. So it depends if it's an abandoned vehicle on the property or someone that's staying in the vehicle on the property, or if someone had set up a tent on the property. So it becomes a trespassing issue at that point. So we in the RCMP have had a discussion about that. And really, if you envision that it's your property and there's a tent set up on your property, or you own a vacant commercial lot and there's someone there. So the first thing that we look at from an enforcement standpoint is it fenced or is it signed? Does it clearly state no trespassing? Does it clearly state business use only? If not, how would you know if you're trespassing or not? The next step would be, if it's not signed, is for an agent of that property. So it could be the owner of the property, it could be a property management company, it could be the manager of a store, would go out and serve notices, and that can be done verbally or written to say, hey, you're trespassing on my property, you need to go. No different than if you had someone trespassing in your property. You're in my backyard, you've set up a tent, you need to get out of here. If they fail to leave and they've been served notice, they can then contact the RCMP, and under the Petty Trespass Act, the RCMP can attend and they can serve notice to tell them to leave, and if not, they can be served a fine. It's a $287 fine under the Petty Trespass Act. If it's a pure abandoned vehicle, again, you own a vacant lot, someone dumps a vehicle on that, I can deal with that. That's a process of essentially you fill out a form and say, this vehicle's on my property, I want it gone. We go down, we chalk the tire, we try and contact the owner. If it's there after 3 days, we get it towed and removed out of there. So 2 different processes, one trespassing, one abandoning vehicles on private property. Make sense?
Yes,
good.
Thanks very much.
It's a great question.
Thank you. Travis.
So just a quick update on what's been going on. We have had a very good response for the business survey. We're looking at about a 25% response rate right now, so about 140 respondents. And then I've just been sort of going through that data and also been going around throughout the town and trying to contact people and interview people that are living in their vehicles. I've also spoken with a reporter from the Outlook, and so we have a little piece going up for that, describing what my duty is and what my jobs are. And that's sort of it. We're going now, still in the data collection phase, and really not trying to look at any preliminary recommendations or results. So that's where we're standing.
So, and what kind of response are you getting from people you interact with?
For the most part, it's been positive. There's been a couple that have been hesitant, and again, if somebody doesn't want to speak to me, they're well within their right to not carry on the conversation subsequent. It's just a matter of trying to find individuals, that are at their vehicles, or I've gone down to the community dinner as well on a Monday and seeing if I can approach anybody in that. But again, I'm not, looking under doormats or knocking on doors or things like that. It's just sort of individuals I can come across, people that have had businesses that have people that live in their vehicles that know about it have sometimes contacted me, or the employees have contacted me. So it's sort of just seeing who I can approach and who's outside of their vehicle at a particular point in time. Just doing sort of random checks throughout the community, going through the Panhandle, going through the home hardware lot, that sort of thing. So,
great. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for your presentation so far, gentlemen. I know that one of the items that we heard of when we had this first presented to council was the fact that there are quite a few blogs and Facebook pages and so on and so forth that encourage people to, or advertise the Panhandle as a place to camp for free. I had asked at that time whether that was going to be addressed and those things electronically corrected. Has that started yet?
Yes, it has, but that's
Perfect.
going into communications. I'm not, so I will
Oh, okay.
liaise with them.
I'm not sure who. I'm
Yeah,
just-
no, so somebody is taking care of that, but what I'll do is I'll pass on any information that I find about things that are being posted, and that's being dealt with appropriately.
Okay, so then if anyone else sees anything online, they should pass it to communications.
Yeah,
So they'll
and
address
or they
it.
can, if you'd like to, you can also pass it on to me, and I'll pass it on,
Okay.
on up. So if I know about it as well, that sort of helps me determine where people may be at, so.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for being here for a brief report. I don't see any other questions.
Sorry.
No, just in the nick of time, yes.
So we talk about numbers like 80 to 85% are just passing through. What does that actually mean in real numbers? Because that helps me figure what the other 20% looks like.
So I gave you the real numbers on the number of tickets issued. I didn't bring the real numbers, but it's probably at this point about half. So about half the people we've talked to, so 20, 25 is.
Okay.
And again, we've just shifted our approach in the last couple of weeks as a result of complaints being lodged. So when it comes time for the final report, I'll be able to give you the total number of warnings or tickets issued for parking an RV from midnight to 8 a.m.
Gotcha. And how many folks do you encounter? We talk about the 15 to 20%. Are those people that are working in Canmore and living in their vehicle, or truly homeless, or?
I would say every person I've talked to in that ballpark, 15 to 20%, are living in Canmore and working in Canmore.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
I did want to highlight as well, I forgot to say that we do a weekly briefing, so every Wednesday morning, it includes Travis, myself, RCMP, Public Works, Recreation, and FCSS. So we've taken that approach of, let's not wait for a whole bunch of time, let's get together, what are the updates, what's upcoming, what have we learned from the last week? It's almost like an emergency management briefing, right? Keep it quick to the point, and then nobody gets caught off guard. So it's worked really well so far.
That's great. Councillor Sanford, do you have something?
Yes. Are we keeping any kind of record as to vacancies in campgrounds during this time? Is that a conversation you're having with anybody?
Actually, I just spoke with Andreas today, and he is going to be giving us the vacancy for Wapiti. So we are going to be looking at tracking the vacancy throughout the summer. So when we do the final recommendation report, that will be a part of it. Or not the final recommendation, the final statistic report.
So on a day-to-day basis, we don't know if the campgrounds are full, if that's why people are sleeping in their vehicles, or?
So I wouldn't be able to tell you the vacancy today, but what we're going to be doing is tracking it on a day-to-day basis. And so when we're looking at all the numbers in a whole, we can see if there was vacancy at the same time.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Mr. Canmore, you had something to add?
Yes, if I could. We don't have the numbers for this year, but if we look back historically the last couple of years, typically we would only have the campground, the municipal campground, full on long weekends only. So I would bet that there would be occupancy at this point, during the week for sure.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, comments, call a short recess. We'll reassemble in 15 minutes. Canmore Eagles and Pinnacle Hockey Incorporated financial relationship. Mr. McKay.
That's right. Pleasure to be here today, Your Worship, members of council. We'll start off, we'll give you essentially a reminder of where we were this time last year and how you directed us to report back on the relationship between Pinnacle Hockey and the Canmore Eagles, deliver some results there, and then also give you an opportunity to ask any questions you might have.
Thank you.
So about this time last year, a review of the Canmore Eagles audited financial statements indicated they exceeded the debt ceiling, their total indebtedness ceiling, as prescribed by the 2014 Deferred ICE Rental Repayment or Payment Agreement. So we came back and brought a revised agreement for approval. And as part of that agreement, we were to report back about this time this year as to the relationship between Pinnacle Hockey and the Canmore Eagles, because at that time it wasn't clear to council or to administration exactly what made up that relationship. So in order to do that, we worked with the Canmore Eagles, and they provided us with a number of documents. They provided us with the now superseded service agreement, which ran from 2016 to 2019. They also gave us a draft copy of their updated service agreement that governed the relationship between the two parties. And so draft just because a couple of terms haven't been fully confirmed on it, but the spirit of the agreement certainly is such that indicates a contractor relationship, essentially. They also provided us with a shareholder list for Pinnacle Hockey and Pinnacle Endeavours, as well as the overview of the relationship between the two parties, which was contained in your agenda package. So from those documents, we've determined that, well, essentially Pinnacle Hockey is contracted to provide management, coaching, and business development services to the Canmore Eagles. And this agreement the agreements are quite similar to those utilized by other not-for-profit sport groups that operate within the town of Canmore. Some of the specifics might be a bit different, but it's a common practice for not-for-profit groups to contract out services which they can't provide with volunteers or otherwise in-house. A change from the 2016 to 2019 service agreement is now the 2019 service agreement between the two parties has been expanded, and really the only activities performed by Pinnacle Hockey within Town of Canmore facilities are as a contractor to the Canmore Eagles. So it's tightened up that relationship and alleviated some of the administrative challenges that we experienced previous when it wasn't fully clear who was using the ice or other facilities. As well, the shareholder information that was provided indicates that nobody on the board of directors for the Canmore Eagles has ownership or shares related or within Pinnacle Hockey. So from what we've determined, there's a clean break between the board of directors and the private corporation that is Pinnacle Hockey.
And that includes outside of financial relationship as well, so there's no crossover between Eagles board members and Pinnacle's Hockey in terms of their management?
That's correct. So the board of directors is, yes, completely separate. I would almost say that the principal of Pinnacle Hockey almost acts like the executive director or as a CAO might act for a municipality. Okay. Perfect. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
I don't really have too many questions. The report was pretty accurate or pretty detailed and not a complex issue to report on. Related to, although not directly related to the Pinnacle relationship, I'm just curious what's the current status of the ice rental payments for the Eagles?
So under the accounts payable, accounts repayment agreement that we executed after it being approved with council last year. The Eagles have met the minimum payment requirements for the principal amount. And so that amount stands at around $117,000, which needs to be retired by 2024.
Right, so they're staying current with that agreement. In regards to the year-to-year ICE user payments, are they current with those?
So not currently. They did want to explore getting some assistance with that and perhaps working something out with the municipality to enhance the infrastructure, namely a bar at the Canmore Recreation Centre. Through that process, they're now late on those payments, but have indicated that they'll be able to pay shortly, or they'll be willing to pay shortly.
Willing to pay. They will be paying shortly. That's the information.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. And we have begun to charge interest on that amount.
Great. Yeah, I think it's important that they remain current with the annual ICE user fees, of course. So that's good to know that that's happening or going to happen. Is there any questions or comments from members of council? Seeing none, thanks very much for being here today. Is there anybody here for fire?
Not yet. We've sent an email, but...
Okay. I'll just move that we amend the agenda to consider item D6 later in the agenda.
Okay, we are also, I can go see if Claire Elliott is available.
Oh, okay.
Or I could do, I'm prepared to do
D8? Well, we can move ahead to D8. I'll move that we amend the agenda to bring D8 forward. Those in favor? Opposed? D8 it is. Business transformation update.
Thank you, Mayor Borman, members of council. I'm standing in today for Therese Rogers. Unfortunately, she's had a family emergency and has had to leave. So she has left me with notes for her presentation, but if you'll bear with me, I'll do mostly reading of them, and certainly, though, I have been well involved in this project.
Well, maybe we should invite those people in.
Can speak to hopefully any of the questions that you have. So I'm here to talk to you today about the business transformation process update that Ms. Rogers is leading, and to remind council on how we got there. You approved the organizational review as part of the 2017-2018 budget, and we hired a consultant, NAD Consulting, to do that project, and they presented the findings of that review to council back in November. So through that process, this is a very detailed slide, but there were a number of strengths identified, mostly though that we're have a very unique and dedicated staff that are highly committed to their work, and something the consultant has seldom seen. But he also identified that there were some issues that needed to be addressed, issues around organizational structure, capacity, and processes. So at the highest level, our organizational structure limits our scalability. Our workloads and public expectations place excessive pressure on staff, and essentially we have had insufficient capacity across the organization to address that pressure. And so we have functioned with informal processes that worked fine when we had less complexity and volume of work, but we have now reached the limit of our current administrative model, and it's time to scale up and create a more formalized administration. And that was identified as the root cause of most of our issues. So scaling up our administrative model does not necessarily mean we become more bureaucratic. It means that we're intending to leverage the talent and dedication that we have in our staff to strengthen our organizational structure, improve our internal capacity through better management, and improving efficiencies by addressing some of our current resource-intensive administrative processes. And essentially, that is what we're calling the business transformation. So the areas of focus for 2019 in the business transformation is to create capacity and improve efficiency by identifying and implementing process improvements and establishing a project management office, or the PMO. And I'm going to focus most of the presentation on the details of that. But there were some other recommendations that NAD Consulting identified in their report, and I'll touch on those at the end. So what is a process, and why do we need to review them? So processes provide consistent results. If we have good defined processes, it doesn't matter who's delivering the service, the customer or client receives the same approach. And sometimes people think processes will create red tape and slow things down. We don't believe that to be true, and neither did our consultant. Well, 80% or so of what we deliver, if you can think of whether it's a development permit or a building permit or an accounts payable paying an invoice, the majority of what we do can be routine. And so if we have a defined process that we can look to it will actually create more flexibility and free staff up to handle the unique situations that do arise from time to time that do require us to provide that individualized one-to-one service. So documenting processes is necessary to see where there are opportunities for efficiency and to establish the consistent approach to doing the work going forward. And by establishing this consistency, the majority of our routine work will address the majority of our routine work. It'll open up the capacity to allow us to do those individualized services. So processes that we are currently reviewing in 2019, and we're analyzing these for standardization and efficiency, include our facility booking process, our rec staff scheduling process, building permit, development permit, and accounts payable processes. And these were selected because they were identified by the manager and by the consultant as having the highest opportunity for internal or external benefit in improving efficiencies. So this next slide, just don't expect that you can read it, but the very first step, and we've hired NAD Consulting again to come in and work with the people that are actually doing the work. And he starts with a full interview process and documents every step of the process. It might start with opening an envelope or answering a phone call, etc. And he documents every step and the workflow required for every process. And it's important to understand where we currently are so that we can address where we can gain efficiencies. So I believe this is the supplier invoices, what it takes when we receive supplier invoices. That's the process diagram you're looking at. And so the analysis for improvements, this slide is showing the steps in that process that can be eliminated if we automate and go to a complete paperless system. So, of course, it takes resources and money and potentially new software to go to a paperless system. But between then and now, we can do things to ready ourselves to automate those processes. And there are still some efficiencies to be gained before we get to full automation. So this is the steps that we're going through for each of those processes I identified. I'm missing a slide. Anyways, the next steps on the process review piece, so for all those processes that we reviewed, there's a business case analysis being prepared for each process. We're going to look at, okay, what would it cost to automate, for example, all of our accounts payable system? What would it take our IT department to plan for that implementation? And is there a business case in efficiency to move down that process? So we'll be preparing those business cases, and then we'll be developing a process for processes, because we want to be able to move forward and do this process analysis on a lot more of the things we do. And if you recall back when council was reviewing all of our policies, we needed a policy on policies, just exactly on, you know, what is it that we put in policy, you know, what do we want to define, and that's a similar thing we're going to do for our processes. So we will develop that process for processes, we'll begin to implement the improvements, and then we'll train other staff on how to do their own review and analysis of processes. So moving to the Project Management Office, or PMO. The PMO is the acronym for Project Management Office, and the options around developing a project management office, which was a high recommendation by the consultant, can range from a very formalized department that oversees and manages all projects the organization does, and many organizations do that, to creating a cross-departmental sort of framework. And that's the process that we're going to work towards, is creating a framework using the skills of our existing project managers. We have staff that are trained. You can get your designation in project management. And we have staff in engineering, facilities, public works, and IT that have that designation. We're using those skills and creating an interdepartmental team. The best analogy I can use is our TRIG group. We have a group that we use the acronym TRIG, Traffic Review Improvement Group, and that includes our engineering, bylaw, streets and roads. Anybody else in TRIG? Anyways, that generally they get together on a regular basis. So our project management group will be structured that way as well, just a cross-departmental team. And the objectives of a project management office are to create standardized tools and processes so that we can improve efficiency of project delivery. Also, actually, to define, you know, what a project is and when do we need to formalize a structure around a project. And there will be a single point of oversight to enable a high-level review of projects. So the project management office will get together and review sort of all large projects that will be undertaken by the corporation. They'll also develop project management skills by providing training and support across the organization, and break down silos by coordinating work better with stakeholders across the organization. So a more formal approach to project management will allow us to move from installation to implementation. And the implementation process is a more holistic approach where we consider all stakeholders' needs right at the very beginning. So an example we're currently working on is the implementation of the CityView software in the planning department. When you approve as a council a new software package for planning, you know, gone are the days where you take something off the shelf and you plug it in, right? There's all kinds of interplay between various departments. So we have to think about how that relates to economic development and the business licensing program, how that software communicates with all of our other software and databases. And so that is being run as a project implementation. And the benefits of a formalized project management office are numerous. I won't read out the slide, but the one I wanted to highlight is the second bullet there, where we'll have fewer misunderstandings and greater clarity around processes and resource requirements. Getting a clear understanding of what it will take to deliver the outcome that's approved, the resources and timelines. And I think that's something that resources timeline, and when I say resources, I mean human resources and financial resources in budget dollars. And so the better we do at defining a project and the stakeholders and stages of a project, the more accurately we can propose budgets for you. So I did want to walk you through some of the structure. And you first saw this project management structure on July 2nd when the engineering department put forward a request to hire a project coordinator for the TIP 20 project. So what we will be doing is each time a project is identified and the project management office says, yes, this is a project and it needs to go through a project management framework, we're going to create an org chart for that project. And that those structures and roles will get definitions, and the organization will receive training on the roles and responsibilities of the various project elements. So just quickly, I'll review those. The project sponsor at the top, and in the TIP 20 project, that was the General Manager of Municipal Infrastructure, and that's the individual with the overall accountability for the project and acts as the link between the project, administration, and council. So that's the role of the project sponsor. Then we had 2 project directors in TIP 20, and that was our Manager of Engineering and Manager of Public Works. And their role would be to manage resources, oversee finances, to ensure the project progresses on time and on budget, and generally oversees the project managers and liaises directly with the project managers and the project team. The project manager is identified as our municipal engineer, Chantal Blais, in the TIP 20 project. And that person has the overall responsibility for the successful implementation, planning, monitoring, controlling, and closure of the project. They're responsible for making decisions large and small, and ultimately responsible for the final quality of the project. A strong leader is required in the project manager role. The project coordinator, which is the position you approved for TIP 20, is the sort of day-to-day on-the-ground, on-site person who will manage resources, information, scheduling, and activities on-site and report back to the project manager. So we're going to, the next steps for the, I'm missing another slide. Anyways, the next steps for the project management office are to formalize that structure within the town, to finalize those tools and templates that internal teams will use, and to develop project management processes and language and provide that training and support across the organization. So I mentioned at the outset that there were a number of recommendations that NAD Consulting made in the organizational review. And so some of those recommendations were outside of the process and project management recommendations. And we've done a number of things. We're tracking them. We'll report them back to you on an annual basis on everything that gets completed. But to date, we have completed a number of things. Again, I won't read through the entire list. A couple of those have impacted council directly. The first one and the last one there, reducing the number of council meetings per month. That was intentional. It has saved, from administration's perspective, significant resources. And also moving you onto the Dayforce system, which is our payroll system, so that you don't manually have to submit your per diem claims, et cetera. And hopefully you're seeing that there's some efficiencies gained in that for you as well. Some of the other recommendations were to improve our structure and capacity. Capacity is really in the human resources, so we did have the benefit of council approving a number of positions last year. You know, we've had transition through the town, but all of the new positions that you approved for the 2019 budget have been hired and are in place, and includes the general manager of corporate services, the manager of IT, our new manager of planning, the executive office admin assistant. So there's a number of new staff that are in place and are, you know, hitting the ground running now. So we feel that we have the capacity to implement some of these recommendations. We've also refined our structure, probably not something you see that much, but now that we have a corporate services division, we've realigned a couple of departments to report directly to the corporate services general manager, and that includes the municipal clerk team and the IT team. IT used to report through to finance. They no longer do. And there's also been some restructuring within the protective services area to have the fire chief now report directly to the general manager of municipal services, which leaves the manager of protective services to focus on emergency preparedness and bylaw services. So those are some of the structure and capacity pieces we've done. In addition, there are a number of things in progress. You heard today about some of the work that Bow Valley Parent Link has undertaken. While it wasn't a direct recommendation through NAD Consulting's report, we have seen some of our teams get excited about the opportunities within their own departments, and they're identifying some of the things that are listed, for example, on this list here, and are working through some of those improvements as well. So just to summarize, the business transformation process is intended to strengthen the town's organizational structure, improve our staff and management capacity, and our administrative and business process efficiencies. And we will be reporting to you in the future as we complete some of the process improvements. And with that, I am happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much. Fairly comprehensive report. I don't have any questions really here. Other councillors might, except for one. It's not entirely clear for me. I think the PMO is intended to be not a forever entity. It's short-term, I mean, number of years, but...
No. Sorry, we expect that would be a forever entity.
Okay.
Yep. We will never stop delivering projects.
Yeah.
I
understand. Initially, I thought it was for the transition recommended through the NAD report, but
yeah,
through your discussion, through your presentation, it was starting to occur to me that this was something we would put in place for future reference as well. So. No,
what may have a shelf life is something we're calling the transition team. So Therese Rogers has created a transition team and has brought in some resources. They were the ones that looked at some of the low-hanging fruit and then identified where we could have the biggest impact and identified those processes to tackle first. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking Ms. Rogers' place. Of course, you're here. And we will then move on to item D6, the Canmore Fire Rescue Master Plan update. Chief Collar.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Sorry about the not being here, but I was going to use the old joke about putting out a fire, but we won't go there. All is good, though. All is very good. Thank you for a few moments. We'd just like to update you on the Fire Rescue Master Plan. Just as a quick review, Council approved and directed staffing study was commissioned in 2016, and the Fire Rescue Master Plan in 2017. It was implemented around that time, and I took it over in around 2017. This is our second progress report on it, and we're just going to skim a few highlights and happy to take some questions on it. So just a quick update. The work is continuing on the research and implementation of all the recommendations in the master plan, and there were quite a few of them, pushing 40 of them. We have touched every one of the recommendations, so 100% of the recommendations in that report have been reviewed. They're either completed, in progress, or in the research stage. The large majority of the recommendations are actually being implemented to some pretty positive effect. We're starting to see a lot more cohesiveness in the team, a lot more structure and direction and accountability, being able to report on metrics, track our equipment, our staff a bit better. So overall, I think it's been a really positive experience on that piece. Just the quick heat map on it. I've taken every recommendation and assigned it a color. I think you've seen a version of this last year. I'd like to have a sea of blue within about another year. That's what we're shooting for. So the blue basically it's been completed, it's been resolved. It's either been implemented or researched and approved to go a different direction. By and large, they're all implementations. The green is in progress, the yellow we're researching it, and we have not touched one that hasn't been started yet. You might wonder on the intermediate term, which actually captured 2017 and 18, why there's 3 greens. They arguably could be blue, but with a new fire prevention officer coming on in 2020, council approved, we're adding that resource to those 3 topics. So until that person is in place and adding to those programs, one of them is an education program, I'm just holding it in an in-progress piece there. Next year, we pretty much intend to wrap every one of those items, and reporting beyond that will just be ticking off the things that are outstanding, rather than giving you a 5-page document every time. That's kind of where we're at, and just some general observations that we've noticed over the last 2 years for me now, and the last year since my last progress report. The department is really very well supported and equipped, and that's through council administration, and we're seeing that strength and building on that capacity, so I just want to take a moment to thank you for that. We really do see the downstream effects. It is worth it, for sure. We have some new phases and roles, and that's really bringing a positive energy. The new deputy chief has been a great addition, obviously. It's really built on the capacity on that. We just hired 4 new casual firefighters as replacements for outgoing. They're bringing a really new energy to the station and to the service we're providing. We have 2 external candidates that are really, well, now members, that are really bring a fresh look and very professional look, which I'm very happy about. And we're really looking forward to the council-approved fire prevention officer for January next year. We're working with HR already to build that job description. It'll be an industry standard at minimum job description for that piece, and we feel the education and prevention piece, which is our first line of defense, really going to build on that. So that all fits together as a great team. We're in the peak staffing right now, and other than a bit of organizational challenge, which is worth every bit of it, we're seeing some great results. So we're getting a crew out the door in under 90 seconds during the day shifts, and that's really great to see. We can clip just about the entire municipal boundary, developed, I should say, municipal boundary in right around the 10-minute mark. The staff have really taken to that. There's a point of pride of getting the truck out the door, getting the service there immediately. So seeing that's really great. Now, even beyond the response piece, there's the capacity in station now to just take on a bit more work. So Fire Smart assessments we're doing, station tours of children and summer camps, we're doing with staff we have already in place rather than calling staff in. Car seat clinics, you name it. We have a bit more capacity in the station now to look after those community programs. In addition, the equipment, not that it was not taken care of before, but it's much easier to do all the required legislated trip checks, truck checks, equipment checks. They're all checked off very nicely now. So we're really seeing that as a really positive piece. To close that out, at the end of the summer, I will bring sort of a lessons learned and metrics and what did it look like for the summer, what did we gain from it. So I'm happy to report on that. Some observations just generally. Call volumes are still tracking upwards. I report on that quite regularly to Sally and upwards. If you ever wanted a quick snapshot where we are, I track it on a monthly basis. I'm happy to send it. Call volumes are year over year increasing. Population and density is rising, and a part of that sort of ties into the affordable housing and multifamily units. We are densifying our town as we're going, which is really great on so many ways, but we watch that. We're concerned about that. Not concerned about that, we just watch it and want to be able to react and proact to it, actually. The congestion around the fire station is absolutely a thing, and we'll have a conversation about that in the fall. I'm noticing it more and more, and I'm sure everyone is. It's a challenge getting people to the station, and sometimes a challenge getting out and away. And just kind of a final observation, a service level standard might help guide and planning into the future, and it's again certainly a conversation we're happy to have as the year plays out, and I think this fall that might be on a list somewhere. That'll help us guide our next steps. So we're finding that the call volume, the demand for service, the complexity of service in the area we're covering are getting to that place that a bit more of a definition of a service level where we want to be at might be advantageous. But I think that's a fairly large conversation that we have at a workshop level just to get us going on that. That's basically it in a nutshell. I didn't want to unpack all 40 recommendations. I thought maybe if there's any specific questions on any area, I'm obviously very happy to answer that. And I think, yeah, that was my last one. I was trying to put us back on schedule since I blew it in the first place.
Well, thanks very much for that. I have one or two questions, and I'm sure others do as well. Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, that last bullet point on that last slide about service levels, to have a service level standard. Do you have, I know it can be complex sometimes, where you called out to assist rescue, search and rescue.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of that complexity, understanding that, it must be, it would be a Hobbesian choice to be called to a fire and then called to a rescue. So how does that, is that part of the definition that you need?
Sure, that could absolutely be part of the conversation. I think when you talk about a service level standard, there's a variety of facets. One is just pure time and metrics. How quickly do you get the service to the person's calling for it? Another part of that conversation is what services do you provide? So to your point, Councillor, the rescue, where we support Alberta infrastructure or Alberta environment with rescue, is that a service we continue to provide? Since we've gotten here, we've minimized our footprint in that rescue category. I can report on how many times we assist the province, and it tends to be right on our border. We have lots of areas that it seems to be a fuzzy area. Is it town of Canmore or is it the province? And the bottom line is we want to protect our citizens, and frankly, half the time it's our own folks we're helping. We tend to provide trailhead support that is generally speaking in or near our municipal boundary, and we let the conservation officers do the technical part of the rescue. We think that's a better fit for our municipal service, and we're there to provide that infrastructure and background. Landing stars, developing helicopter landing zones, providing staff to move personnel, providing some equipment if needed. But we've tried to keep our footprint to really our wheelhouse and let the conservation officers do their piece. And I think that's going quite well, actually.
Thank you.
I just had a couple of questions around item 2930, and it relates to 32, 33. So 29 from the initial master plan recommended transition from reliance on career casual fighters, the total complement be reduced to 12, and in the update you're noting that it's settled at 18. And there's a lot of information there. Could you just talk briefly about that part of the implementation of the plan and how your experience is informing something other than what was recommended in the plan?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mary. Yeah, that's a great one, actually, because it is kind of complex. It is one of two or three areas within the master plan that I had a slightly divergent view on it. The master plan contemplated reducing the casual pool down, I think eventually down to 4, like a very small pool, and increase the paid response pool. What the master plan didn't fully appreciate maybe at the time is that because our full-time staff are part of the collectively bargained union, that only casual employees can backfill the full-time employees within that union parameter. So if you reduce the pool of the employees eligible to work full-time shifts, you'll reach a point where you don't have enough staff to fill the full-time shifts. So there's usually a ratio that most departments carry in a composite department, which we are, of casual unionized members that are supporting the full-time unionized members. If you reduce the pool too far, we won't have a member that we could fill on that seat. And another complexity we have, and I think this is a positive thing actually, our casual employees, they don't just show up for a shift because I'm working next Tuesday day shift. In fact, all of them, well, 80–90% of them are resident in the town of Canmore, and they're also encouraged to turn out as part of our paid response group. So if we put out a general page right now and 4 people showed up, 2 of them are likely our paid responders, which we refer to traditionally as our volunteers, but 2 of them are those casual members that want to come in and help too, and they just come in, they'll do that call, that event, and go. So it's a hybrid position actually. But within that casual pool, because we're signatory to this contract, we need to maintain, and I'm guessing around 1720 is a good number for that, to support the full-time staff. So that's why my sort of position on that is slightly divergent from the master plan.
great, and certainly you've got eyes on the ground, so your position, I think, is quite valid.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's that little subtlety around that. I would be less confident about that if the casual members just came in, worked a shift, and went back to insert town here. But we are literally down to maybe not even 5%, not even actually. We have a recent development. And so pretty much every casual is resident to the town, and they consider themselves a volunteer as well.
Just curious from what you just said, so if a casual firefighter turns out on a general call, is that firefighter there as a casual firefighter or as a paid on response?
They're there as a firefighter. I view them as a firefighter, and I have the same expectation of the casual and as the paid responder. They're trained approximately to the same level. Their pay scales are relatively equitable. The casual is slightly higher, as you know. But my first and foremost expectation that they're fully trained firefighter providing the service. There is not a hierarchy between the paid responder and the casual when they come and turn out to the call. There's no privilege or position that holds. So they get on the back of the truck and they grab a hose or a rope and away they go.
That's good to know. And in a similar part of the conversation, talking about the paid response firefighters, in item 30, you note that you don't anticipate the need for a recruit class in 2018 or 19. You note that our paid response firefighters are essentially pretty keen and want to stay.
Yeah.
We have a strong complement there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I do a yearly employee survey engagement, and I get this feedback consistently, and I get it anecdotally and formally as well. The folks we have right now are going nowhere. They really feel that as part of the team, they're supported as such. So we see very little turnover in both the casual and the paid response groups. They're invested in the town and the department. And if I go by the feedback I get formally and informally, there is very little attrition coming up. So adding a class for the sake of adding a class, I don't think is the best value for the town and frankly our agency. Our turnouts to general pages or fire events, rescue events are good. They're solid, particularly when it's a working event because we have a radio pager system so you can modulate what it looks like, what it sounds like. When we have an event where we need people, generally speaking, we're suitably attended. So that's why I was going to go through the winter and see what it looks like, and just really we track those numbers monthly. What are our turnouts looking like? Are they adequate? And they're better than adequate actually right now. So that was the rationale behind just holding off on the class until we know we need them. And if we get to that place where we need them, we know the interest is there for the casual recruitment, which again, it's a position that doesn't really exist. It's a part-time position that you come out as needed or take a shift here and there. We had, I think it was 104 applicants. Now, granted, a lot of them are provincial applicants, but I mean, we had 20, 30 people, and within that group, some very well-trained people that live in the valley that will be an asset when we need them.
That's all very reassuring.
Yeah, it's nice to see.
As a householder. And I'm certainly looking forward to your report. You know, after the peak staffing trial period, and it sounds like it's working very well. On another tack, you referenced earlier the Fire Smart assessments. And you indicated that there's a number of those. Do you have any ballpark numbers? How many assessments are happening, or?
This is where I feel desperately unprepared because Carrie isn't here, Deputy Chief Martins. She's taken the lead on that whole program. I can report that back to council, happy to do that. She's away this week, but we are starting to do them. I know the crews are going out 2-3 times a week to do them. Carrie's taken the initiative to do a few herself too. She likes that connection with the community, which I think is wonderful. I'm happy to report that.
Sure, no, that's great. It's not urgent. I'm just curious, particularly after the Fire Smart forums that we've conducted. You know, I'm really curious to know if the public, particularly the public that are living in those neighborhoods that are right up against the forest, are getting the message from us or not.
I'm happy to report on that. I can say anecdotally, speaking with Carrie and the crews that are doing them, generally speaking, when we've attended, it's been a very positive experience.
Great. Yeah. And I'm assuming that mostly it's in the neighborhoods I just referenced up against the forest?
You know, it's been an interesting mix right around the town. Yeah,
Okay.
lots of areas that you wouldn't even necessarily think of it have asked to come out and have an assessment on
Great,
it.
great.
Now, it's somewhat, you know, the folks that are really reaching out are kind of keen in the first place, so you
Right.
tend to get those folks.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, it's been a positive experience, yeah.
Excellent. Ms. DeSoto, did you have something to add?
Yes, I do. In fact, Chief Gaylor, you put a number in your service area report, so I can read from that. So it says Fire Smart home assessments are well underway. The 13 assessments to date have been great opportunity to gauge residents on a topic of high priority on their minds.
Great. Thank you.
That sounds very suspiciously like Carrie's words, and I leave it with those that are better than I at that.
Yeah, and I would say 13 is a really good start. You know, it'd be nice if we had 300.
Yeah.
If we could get the residents to really get to understand the importance of fire smarting. I don't think I had any other questions specific to this update. I don't know if other members of council have anything. If not, thanks very much for being here. Appreciate the report.
Thank you very much.
Look forward to hearing more at the end of the summer.
Thanks.
And now we will move on to D7. D7, Calgary-Bow Valley Mass Transit Feasibility Study, Ms. Zellick.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councillors. I'm Clara Lake, Transportation Engineer for the town of Canmore. This afternoon I'll be giving a brief overview of the Calgary-Bow Valley Mass Transit Feasibility Study. As Council is aware, Canmore continues to see growing levels of visitation each year, which puts increasing strain on our transportation system. The same pressure is being felt by our neighbouring communities. The town of Banff was successful in applying for $350,000 of grant funding with support from Canmore, Calgary, ID9, and Cochrane to allow for this feasibility study to move forward. Each of our communities has a shared interest in reducing the number of personal vehicles traveling between Calgary and the Bow Valley and increasing options for mass transit connecting our communities. This is supported by other initiatives that member municipalities are undertaking to support local transit and active transportation infrastructure so that there are facilities in place to support those who may consider mass transit as an option to travel to, from, and within the Bow Valley. I'll provide a brief overview of study findings and then speak about the next steps for this work. The study provided an overview of the key areas that would be involved in implementing a rail or bus service, including an assessment of existing and additional infrastructure that would be required, high-level operating and implementation plans for a bus or rail service, ridership forecasts, as well as estimates for capital costs, potential revenue, and operating costs. First, let's have a look at the proposed bus and rail routes. The study proposes 2 bus routes, each with different stop locations. Route A is an express service from downtown Calgary, which would stop at the Crowfoot C-Train station before connecting on to Canmore and arriving in Banff. This route is intended to cover downtown Calgary and the northwest part of the city. Route B is proposed to start in southwest Calgary with stops at Highway 22 interchange, Stoney Nakoda Lands, and Canmore before arriving in Banff. This route is intended to cover Calgary residents as well as other visitors staying in southwest Calgary. The proposed routes do not include a stop in Cochrane, which would add a large deviation from the highway and increase travel time significantly. The stop planned along the Highway 22 interchange with the TransCanada would accommodate that ridership. Taking a look at the planned routing or proposed routing for rail service, this would utilize a new parallel track within existing CP right-of-way, which would enable a passenger train to operate reliably and avoid impacts to CP's existing freight operations. The proposed rail service would start in downtown Calgary East with potential stops in Northwest Calgary, Cochrane, Canmore before terminating at the Banff train station. The consultant that prepared the report recommended terminating the service in Banff to reduce the capital cost of track to Lake Louise and then tying into the new Banff to Lake Louise transit service. Generally, the study concludes that mass transit is feasible. Each of the partner municipalities agreed that some form of mass transit into the Bow Valley is needed and worth pursuing with higher levels of government. This slide provides a summary of key findings, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail in the slides following. In both bus and rail scenarios, the study broke down projected 2022 ridership scenarios into low, medium, and high levels of use. These estimates are based on a variety of data sources that capture the number of visitors traveling to the Bow Valley from Calgary, as well as a number of residents west of Calgary traveling into the city. Taking a closer look at the bus scenario first, projected ridership in 2022 is between 200,000 in the low scenario and 490,000 in the high scenario, with 100,000 projected only if Express Route A runs in the summer. This would mean between 21 buses in the low scenario and 26 buses in the high ridership scenario in the summer, fewer buses needed in the winter. Projected revenues range between $2.2 million in the low scenario and $3.8 million in the high scenario, with $1.1 million associated with the express bus service. Capital costs to get the service running range between $8.1 million in the low scenario to $19.6 million in the high scenario, with operating costs between $4.5 and $5.8 million per year. The operating subsidy per rider decreases significantly as you move from low to higher ridership scenarios. For the rail scenario, projected ridership in 2022 is between 220,000 for the low scenario and 620,000 in the high scenario, which would mean 8 round trips per day in summer and 6 in the winter. Projected revenues range between $3.6 million for the low scenario, $6.1 million for the high scenario. Capital costs are approximately $660 million to get the service running, with operating costs between $13.7 and $14.6 million per year. And I'll just note that there's a typo in the paragraph 4, page 2 of the briefing, but the number in the table here is correct. As with the bus scenario, the operating subsidy per rider decreases considerably as you move from the low to high ridership scenarios, and the subsidy per rider required for the rail service is substantially higher than for the bus. Lastly, the study shows there would be a greater potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through the use of a bus service, while rail would be expected to increase GHG outputs. In summary, all of the municipal partners are in agreement that pursuing some form of mass transit from Calgary into the Bow Valley is an important step in managing congestion within our communities. The study also shows that the capital and operating subsidies required for bus or rail service are significantly beyond the capacity of a single municipality to fund. Should the concept be pursued further, partnership would be required with other levels of government. A regional mass transit working group has been established, which includes elected officials and members of administration from Canmore, Banff, Cochrane, ID9, and Calgary. This group meets monthly and is reviewing recommendations of the study and working towards determining next steps required in order to advance this concept of a mass transit system between Calgary and the Bow Valley. A workshop has been established for September to establish a vision for this group, going forward with an invitation to the Stoney Nakoda to attend also. At this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. There's almost more questions than answers within this conversation, but when in the report is estimating capital costs, and I'm looking particularly at the projected capital costs for the rail scenarios, and I don't recall within the study if the calculation of $660 to $680 million in capital costs, does that include the proposed rail link to the airport, or is that just to get the rail service to downtown Calgary?
I believe that's exclusive from any connection to the airport, because the rail would rely on other connections provided either with bus shuttle service that exists from the airport, or for rail, a connection within Calgary to join up with the
Right.
downtown or the C train station.
The conversation that I've been involved with that multi-community group you mentioned, it's clear that the opportunity to get directly from the Bow Valley to the airport through rail is kind of a motivating factor. And yet it just occurred to me through this report that capital calculation doesn't include what will be a very expensive link to get from this line up to the airport. So.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. And again, there's sort of a lot of assumptions or presumptions made in some of the conversations, but in the operating subsidy for both bus or rail, again, I don't think the study delved into how those operating subsidies might be shared between the municipalities.
It doesn't go into that detail, but in terms of determining next steps and what further work would need to be done in order to advance this concept further, that would be something that would need to be addressed.
Now, on a local level, the proposed route map for the bus shows or suggests that elevation place could be the bus depot. And do we know that that's feasible at elevation place, that we could handle number of buses going in there and additional parking, or that'll be something that we would have to consider in the future?
Yeah, the study does review, I believe, 5 different locations around town that could potentially operate as for bus or rail, and the preferred location was identified as Elevation Place. The recommended location where it would be, I guess, best or most easily accommodated would be on the municipal lands opposite Elevation Place along the CP tracks, with a shorter term implementation plan of the intersection of Benchlands Trail with Bow Valley Trail, which currently serves both local and regional transit as well.
So that the suggestion within the feasibility study was our administration had input on all of that, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Right. And again, I'm not that familiar with some of the details of the report, but the capital costs that are proposed for the all-year rail scenarios didn't include costs like, for the town of Canmore, the need to acquire land and build a station and park and all that?
I believe for the rail scenario, they did recognize some station costs in the capital costs, but no costs associated with park and ride, particularly in Canmore. For the bus, the capital costs exclude station and infrastructure costs because it's largely would be accommodated within existing road right-of-way and transit facilities within town.
So, I'm sorry, so the cost of building a rail station is included in the capital study?
I believe under the rail scenario it is. I can confirm in the report, but I do know that the park and ride was excluded, which would include land acquisition costs.
Great. Are there questions, comments from other members of council? Great, thanks very much for that summary report. There is a lot of work to do, and you referenced the regular meetings that are anticipated from this group that we've struck. As I said in the beginning of my comments, there's certainly more questions than answers at this point.
Yep.
Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.
And that'll take us to D8. Nope, just did that. So we're moving on to E1, council updates. And we'll follow the usual format. If there's any questions from any member of council directed to another member of council, you're welcome to push your buttons. Seeing none. Councillor McCallum?
Question for your worship or Councillor Hillstad. I understand that there was supposed to be a community celebration at the opening of Hawks Bend, and it was cancelled. And I was wondering when that might be
Yeah, I think the discussion I recall, and Councillor Hillstead can weigh in, but the administration of CCHC didn't feel they could pull it together this time, but it would be planned for once everything is finished there, the landscaping and all that. I'm certainly very keen on having that happen. So if I have a say at the board, then we will be doing some kind of a big celebration, I would hope. So it's just, in my understanding, been delayed, not canceled.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions in regards to council updates?
No, but I will add something that if you've driven past the lodge in the last 48 hours, you'll notice that the old lodge is slowly coming down. They're demoing it, so that doesn't mean that our project is confirmed yet, but it means that the old lodge is coming down.
Well, that's, I guess, a positive first step. Yeah. Super. Moving on to item F1, the service area reports. Are there any questions from Section A, CAO's office, or B, Municipal Services? D, Municipal Infrastructure. Just curious, under facilities, the update on the CRC lifecycle maintenance project, noting that multipurpose room 230 is open and available, 3,000 square feet, can accommodate up to 174 people. And I don't think anybody here will be able to answer the question, but follow up perhaps. Just curious if the room is actually being used at this point already, or bookings coming in. Just curious. Somebody has an answer? No. Okay. Is he trying to? Okay, there you go.
There you go. Mayor Borman, I've actually had an opportunity to walk through there. I don't know if it's being programmed or used yet, but we can certainly find out and share those details with council.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to know, because it was some concern to a number of user groups, you know, the closure and all that, and the changed vision that we've implemented there. I'm looking forward to getting feedback from some of those user groups, so it'd be nice to know when it is being booked. Thanks. I have no other questions myself for the service area reports. Are there other questions? Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. In Corporate Services C1, there's the assessment review update. So that is a large number of active appeals. Have we ever had that many before in the past? Like, I see what up to 2016 shows us. Actually, and that was my next question, where it's grayed out, it doesn't state how many were actually active. Do you know what I mean in the chart? Or am I not reading the chart properly?
I think it's safe to assume that everything from previous years is no longer still active.
Well, no, I understand that, but the 29 states, that's how many actually went to, what am I on? So 46 appeals. Of the 46, 4 of them are non-residential, which takes us to 42 residential, 8 withdrawn, 5 withdrawals still pending, so 29 that need to go to the assessment review board. Is that correct?
How I read it.
So that is correct, although there is some expectation that that number continues to drop, and it can right up until even
day
hours
before.
before the
Yeah.
appeal. So if you look at the very first row, at the total number of appeals, in 2017, for example, we had a higher number of 52. And then we ended up with 42 of those being around parking stalls, right? So yes, having 42 on the residential side, I think that's the highest on sort of the residential side that we've seen in a number of years, but not the highest total number of appeals.
No, yeah. Okay. It's certainly, what's explained below is quite a dilemma. I keep telling anybody I know with a kid in university with a mind for numbers that they should go to assessment review school. So, thanks.
Any other questions then for administration from the service area report? See none, we'll move on to the council resolution action list. I do have a question relating to two recent council resolutions, 129 and 130, both having to do with TCK. What are the plans, or do we have plans yet for the developing the bridging document or working with TCK to create a roundtable?
Yes, so Your Honor, those documents are in the bridging document that's in progress. So we're working on our first draft, and then we'll be discussing that with Dave Rodney and various other staff that we feel might be impacted by some of the recommendations that we're bringing forward in the bridging document. And so we're hoping that later in the fall we can bring that to council.
Excellent. And is the same true of the work to create the roundtable?
Absolutely, because it's high season for the tourism industry.
Pardon me?
Because it's high season in the tourism industry right now, we have opted to have those discussions in the fall.
Great, thanks very much. Any other questions from members of council on that item? Seeing none, I believe that brings us to the close. I'll move the committee of the whole be adjourned. Those in favor, opposed, we're adjourned.